It all began the day the school caught fire. It's the absolute chaos. Jokor desperately navigated the hallways as they were swallowed by hungry flames, but his intent was never to escape. Instead, he made a beeline for the art room. His plan was simple and melancholic. If he was destined to die that day, he wanted it to be there, in his favorite place in the world, surrounded by his own creations. He stood before his painting of a cozy cabin in the woods, fully accepting that this was the end of his path, or so he thought. When he finally pried his eyes open, the roaring flames had vanished completely. The suffocating heat had transformed into a gentle, cool breeze. The morning sunlight warmed his face, and the air was filled with the crisp, clean scent of a pine forest. He was not dead. He was simply somewhere else. As it turns out, he had ended up inside his own painting. A full week has passed since he began living in this world that he himself drew. Sometimes he wonders if the other kids managed to escape the fire safely, but here the peace is absolute and overwhelming. After wandering through the forest with his basket in hand, something strange peeks out from behind the bushes with a curious sound. It is a three-eyed rabbit, surprisingly friendly and docile. Jokor never imagined his art would come to life in such a literal way. In this place, time flows in a peculiar manner, and there are even salted unicorns wandering around the garden as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He does not know exactly how long he has been here, but he has slowly grasped the basic rules of this new reality. The first rule is the most useful of all. Anything he draws on his canvas materializes instantly. He draws apples, and with a simple touch, they fall from the painting ready to be eaten. It is effortless. He paints food, tools, or even entire trees. If he traces it, the object appears physically in the world, including sacks of salt, spatulas, or exotic flowers. Essentially, he has forgotten what it is like to spend money at a grocery store. He lives like a king with infinite supplies, but he discovered that his power has a rather pathetic limitation. It does not work on human beings. He tried to create company, but the result was far from what he expected. What emerges from the canvas are warm, lifeless bodies like freshly made corpses. They have no soul and do not breathe. Although that realization actually brings him relief. He prefers his quiet solitude over turning his life into a nightmare by playing God. The second rule is that he can see the outside world through a golden frame hanging from a massive tree. Upon peeking through it, he discovered that more than 30 years had passed since that school fire. 31 years to be exact. The world Jokor once knew had vanished, replaced by something far more savage and untamed. He witnessed people with extraordinary powers casting spells and battling gargantuan monsters amidst the ruins of the city. In such a dangerous landscape, he decided that there was no way he was stepping out of his hideout. He does not have the makings of a hero. He retreated back into his painting, convinced that a portrait should always remain safely within its frame. The outside world is far too chaotic, whereas his personal forest continues to evolve on its own. This place has become a complete ecosystem filled with glowing plants and flowers he never actually drew. He only painted a simple cabin and some greenery, but the canvas decided to expand at its own whim. Now there are crystal plants and exotic landscapes that simply appeared over the decades. Best of all the creatures inhabiting this place are extremely friendly toward him. Even the rarest, most colorful birds approach him without showing a shred of fear or aggression. They perch on his shoulder with total confidence, as if they inherently know that he is the one who created this paradise. Jokor believes it is only natural that they love him. After all, he is the architect of their very existence. It is a peaceful life of a gatherer where he only worries about what he will cook with what he finds along the path. Then a fourth rule, or rather a surprise from the system, appears that he did not expect in the slightest. A floating window provides him with detailed information about a fruit, startling him by simply manifesting out of thin air. It is not a feature of the forest, but a phenomenon that happens to the awakened in the outside world. He learned from eavesdropping through the frame that these people are now called hunters. He finds it fascinating that he has also become one of them without ever having stepped out of his painting. To him, being here is like playing a super relaxed RPG where you only gather items and cook. He even gets options to create medicines with what he gathered today, as if it were new content from a special event. Jokor, the perfect life consists of eating, sleeping, and never having to work again. Who wouldn't want that? Today, the menu calls for sautéed sweet potatoes with honey, a delicacy pulled directly from his infinite cupboard. He was a teacher, he never had time to enjoy cooking, he was always running around in a rush, but now he takes up to 3 hours just to eat in peace. It is a luxury that only a recluse like him could afford. Suddenly, a strange noise pulls him from his thoughts. It comes directly from the entrance. Jokor freezes for a second. It is not normal to hear sounds that do not originate from his forest. The golden frame on the tree is completely silent now, but something outside definitely moved. And this is where the final rule comes into play, the one that changed everything 3 decades ago in the ruins of the school. In the middle of a destroyed and dusty art room, one painting hung intact despite the fire and the passage of time. That day, he stopped being a person to the outside world and officially became the painting itself. His expression on the canvas remained frozen in an eternal calm, unaware that someone had just found him. The painting emits a strange energy, a vitality that an inanimate object should not possess. A dark and mysterious aura surrounds the frame as treasure hunters approach with burning curiosity. The image seems to absorb the light around it, giving it an almost living and rather unsettling appearance. The portrait of Jokor looks impeccable, as if it had been painted only yesterday instead of 30 years ago. One of the men stares at it without words, realizing that he has stumbled upon a treasure beyond measure. Inside the frame, Jokor sighs in relief, thinking that perhaps it was just a wild animal passing near the frame. He continues continues his daily routine, gathering food and whistling a cheerful melody, totally oblivious to the impending danger. He spends the first day cooking fresh vegetables he materialized with his magic brush. The third day, he has a giant pot on the fire, enjoying the aromas of his artisanal cooking. He sits down to enjoy a well-served plate of pasta, thinking he could stay here forever without any trouble. He even takes a nap on the sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket. This is the life, he thinks with a bright smile. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the school, the treasure hunters are thrilled to see that the painting does not have a single blemish. One of them uses his appraisal skill and is shocked to see that the object even has an official title, Portrait of Jokor. That is the name floating above the canvas before the appraiser's eyes. They're in an abandoned school in the middle of the Gangwon Mountains. It is impossible for something like this to be so clean. There is no doubt that it is a dungeon item. Its value must be astronomical on the black market. They decide to wrap it with extreme care. They know the Collectors Guild would go crazy for a piece like this. The guys are already imagining themselves swimming in money. Their luck is finally changing thanks to this unexpected find. And while Jokor continues his royal nap, his entire world begins to be moved from one place to another. Through the golden frame, the exterior landscape changes drastically. In a burnt forest, it shifts to a cultivated field. Then the environment fills with tall buildings and city lights. The painting is traveling at high speed. It ends up stored in a warehouse full of boxes, moving constantly. The entrance to the painting is out of control. Finally, the portrait appears in an elegant auction house, surrounded by rich and powerful people. The gavel strikes, and the bids begin to pour in. Everyone wants to be the owner of the mysterious young man in the painting. People in expensive suits observe the artwork with fascination, never suspecting that the model is watching them right back. The bidding paddles do not stop rising. The price has already exceeded any initial expectation the treasure hunters had. A man raises paddle number 5 with authority. His hands are filled with solid gold rings. Before Jokor realizes it, his painting is purchased and taken to a private gallery of a high-end collector. The place is protected by magical chains and high security seals. No one can enter or leave without permission. The elevator stops at floor F5, the level of maximum security for the rarest and most dangerous items. A man in a white lab coat walks down the hallway, carefully carrying the painting toward its final destination. Strange objects, sealed with talismans, fill the trophy room of this guild. An assistant in a laboratory coat transports the mysterious painting through an immense, luxurious gallery. A hand adorned with expensive gold rings reaches out toward the canvas, as if wanting to touch its very essence. Before the collector's gaze, the portrait of Jokor rests imposingly on the white wall. Isabel, the leader of the Collectors Guild and an S-class hunter, stands in awe of the work. Yearly before, in a private office, a subordinate had approached him with a certain concern. His assistant questioned if he had gone too far with this latest acquisition, but a true collector would never let such a unique piece pass by, regardless of the danger. Is there any particular aspect of Jokor's new situation or his hidden hunter's status that you would like me to explore further? Isabel ignores all complaints, completely absorbed by the melancholy beauty of the young man in the portrait. He declares that it is his money, and he has every right to spend it however he chooses, especially on something this valuable. Even the president of the Hunters Association herself was interested in this particular item. It all began 31 years ago, when the great catastrophe struck the earth and the dungeons first appeared. Monstrous creatures known as divinities emerged to devastate the known world. Entire dimensions collided, altering the reality and geography of the planet forever. It was then that she created the system, giving humanity a fighting chance to survive. In an era, the president of the association became a symbol of hope and eternity. During the auction, even a woman of her stature bid aggressively, reaching astronomical figures. It deeply unsettles the assistant that such a powerful figure would covet this portrait. Despite his S-class appraisal skill, Visible cannot extract a single piece of information from the painting. He only sees illegible symbols. The assistant apologizes for failing to recognize the item's true value due to his own limitations. However, the guild leader admits that he too has no idea what this portrait really is, which only makes it more intriguing. He remains pensive at his desk, analyzing the mystery in his hands. Silence in the office becomes thick while the subordinate waits for a response. What kind of nonsense is this? The assistant thinks, unable to believe what he is hearing. Visible smiles with smug satisfaction. His reputation as the best appraiser in Korea is on the line. It is unheard of for an object to resist his appraisal skill, the highest level in existence. The assistant shudders to think of the implications of having something so unknown on Earth. Visible jokes to relieve the tension, but his gaze hides a growing obsession. Under the dim light, his yellow eye shines with a dangerous intensity. Danger is what attracts him. Precisely because it is so enigmatic and potentially hazardous, he decided to buy it. He wonders who this man is and what secrets his painted image hides. He acknowledges that the talent of whoever painted this is superhuman, regardless of the author. He feels an overwhelming vitality emanating from the canvas, as if someone living were truly trapped inside. Rikor's gaze in the painting seems to follow his every move. Suddenly, Visible notices something strange in the depths of the color. As he tries to penetrate the painting with his senses, he finds only absolute blackness. It is a total void, a darkness that seems to absorb everything that gets close to it. However, within that darkness, vibrant colors and distant galaxies begin to sprout. States and nebulae intertwine in an unimaginable cosmic spectacle. It is possible that this painting contains an entire universe within it. The image of Jokor remains unalterable, jealously guarding the secret of its origin. Isabel steps back, contemplating his new acquisition with a mixture of respect and greed. Yes, he knew it. Isabel celebrates his intuition with jubilation. Surrounded by a metaphorical explosion of confetti and joy, he is convinced that this painting is anything but ordinary, and his face reflects an almost childish excitement. Even with his superior skill, he could not decipher its nature, which only increases his fascination. His yellow eyes glow with curiosity. Meanwhile, in the inner world of the canvas, Jokor observes with astonishment and bewilderment the strange frame that now surrounds his world. Jokor is absolutely terrified by the situation. His heart beats wildly at the uncertainty of his new home. He never imagined that his tranquil life would be threatened in this way inside what he thought was a peaceful cabin. In his perspective, he watches Isabel approach the painting and start talking to him, which leaves him completely stunned. Isabel greets the image of Jokor cheerfully, asking if the master can hear him from the other side. Jokor, frightened, hides behind a tree in his painted world, refusing to interact with the stranger. The young painter observes the luxurious interior of the building where he has ended up, a place that overflows with wealth and care. Every detail of the gallery, from the lamps to the decorations, indicates that the owner deeply appreciates his collection. To Jokor, this is a major problem, as the painting seems to be his only connection to this strange new world. He fears that if someone discovers him, they might consider him an intruder or something worse, and he could end up arrested by the police. He imagines with horror that they might treat him like a cursed portrait, and decide to burn it to get rid of him. A cruel world, Jokor thinks, overwhelmed by the terrible possibilities crossing his mind. Seeing that there is no response, Isabel wonders if he was too rude and decides to give the master time to prepare himself. He says goodbye, promising to return the next day, while Jokor processes his strange reality. Jokor clutches his head in despair. He feels like he is being harassed from the other side and no longer knows how to deal with it. While there is tension outside, everything remains just as calm inside. A good breakfast with eggs and sausage starts his day. He has everything ready to eat, and for dessert, he plans to make tea with the flowers he gathered before they dried out. He realizes he is missing a teapot, so he draws one on the canvas and materializes it instantly to serve himself. He takes a sip of his blue tea. It is perfect, just what he needed to calm his nerves. The system notifies him that it is a medicinal butterfly flower tea, useful for immunity. It would be very useful if he were a normal human. He sits down to rest, thinking that even if the tea heals wounds, he has no way to prove it in this body of his. Ever since he entered the painting, he ceased to be an ordinary person. He no longer feels hunger, sleep, or cold. It is as if he is an evolved being. He can go out to gather things in the field without worrying about the weather. Not a drop of sweat, no matter how hot it gets outside. Best of all, he has rid himself of biological needs. There is no more having to go to the bathroom, a great advantage of living there. He even has a painting of a toilet hanging on the wall, but it is more of an ornament, or a reminder of his past life. He looks at his reflection in the water and reflects on how much he has changed. He feels that he is now the definitive version of a human. He takes a bite, feeling momentarily content. At the end of the day, what he celebrates most is never having to scrub a bathroom again. His peace is shattered when he hears a voice drifting in from the window to the outside world. Someone is calling for him yet again. Jokor pulls a long face. He knows exactly who it is, and he starts to break out in a cold sweat from the sheer social stress it causes him. Isabel has been glued to the frame for 11 days straight, trying to convince him to work for him. The man just wants to give up no matter what. Jokor puts on his introvert potato mask. He just wants peace. But the billionaire keeps asking if he does to get bored being alone. The system says the visitor is safe, but Jokor feels stifled by all the unwanted attention. He just wants to be left alone. Isabel keeps talking to the frame, complaining that Jokor only opens and closes his eyes without saying a single word. The president kneels before the artwork with his assistant by his side, hatching a plan to see if the master will finally react. They have brought someone with a bag over their head, bound and tied, a sacrifice meant to grab the artist's attention. Isabel smiles strangely, remarking that if he does teat like that particular sinner, he can get him an impeccable one if he prefers. He laughs, commenting that finding sinners nowadays is a piece of cake. He offers to bring him exactly the type of person he asks for. Objects, contracts, whatever he wants. Jokor stares into the void, feeling the crushing weight of the pressure. He knows that if he answers even once, his quiet life will be over forever. He continues sipping his tea, but it no longer tastes like anything. He feels like he's going to get indigestion just from listening to the man drone on in different languages. In what he's overheard, this man is the head of one of the most powerful groups in the country. Even his assistant wonders what he is doing there. Isabel lets out a dramatic sigh, clearly annoyed that Jokor has no intention of conversing with him. Jokor remains static within the painting, maintaining his role as an inert portrait to see if the other man will finally tire of it. Fine, I'll come see you later, the president says with a half smile before deciding to withdraw. He walks down the gallery's luxurious hallway with his assistant, leaving the room in complete silence. Jokor grips his cup, thinking that while the guy does seem inherently evil, and there is no malice in his presence, having him there is exhausting. He collapses onto the sofa, exhaling all his tension. Being an introvert while a billionaire harasses harasses you daily is a total energy drain. He gets up to look for something in his boxes. He knows the man won't have impatience, and that eventually he will grow tired of being ignored. He pulls out a bag of flour. He has a plan in mind for when the time comes to interact with the outside. He begins to sift the flour with care. If he has to talk to humans, he had better be prepared and have something to offer. He imagines the worst, the man losing his temper and deciding to burn the painting. That would be the end of his entire world. He begins to mix the ingredients with energy. He has no idea what would happen to his house if the external canvas were damaged. He glances at an antique hourglass as he finishes his preparations. He has no desire to be burned alive just yet, so he knows he has to move. His eyes are full of resolve. He knows he cannot stay still while someone else has total control over his only exit. He finishes baking some snacks that look like small potatoes. This is the first step toward reclaiming control of his own existence. Sand in the hourglass runs out while in the outside world an elevator signals its arrival at the 5th basement level. A curator walks through the gallery's solitary corridors. The elevator indicates the 5th floor, and she continues her nightly round, checking that everything is in order. It is 4:00 a.m. She ensures that the special attention rules are followed, and that the temperature is ideal to avoid damaging the art pieces. She finally reaches the sector where the famous portrait of Jokor is kept. She has to verify that there are no anomalies in this highly valuable piece. She stares fixedly at the painting, which shows a quiet cabin in the middle of a forest. At first glance, everything seems to be in its place, but suddenly, something leaves her frozen. Her eyes widen because she feels that something doesn't quite match what she is seeing in the room. She lowers her gaze to the floor and sees bare feet walking on the cold marble. There shouldn't be anyone else there with her at this hour. Fear takes complete hold of her. Her skin crawls as she senses a strange presence right behind her in the middle of the darkness. She starts to break out in a cold sweat from the nerves. She feels that heavy gaze watching her intently, and she knows it isn't any other employee doing their round. The gallery looks immense and terrifying under the dim night light. She is there alone, facing a phenomenon she cannot rationally explain. "Hello," a mysterious voice says, breaking the absolute silence. A system bubble appears, suggesting that this is not something human. "Would you like to have a conversation with me?" asks a hooded figure that emerges from thin air. It looks imposing and is surrounded by a dark energy. The girl is paralyzed, unable to move while she stares at the entity in front of her. She cannot believe what is happening on her shift. The papers from her report fly through the air due to the impact of her fright. The atmosphere becomes heavy and charged with an indescribable tension. Even her pen slips from her hands and rolls across the floor. The panic is absolute at the sudden appearance of this supposed ghost. Shift scenes to the headquarters of the Kector Guild, one of the 3 most important in Korea. It is an impressive building that is all about luxury and power. The owner is Visible, a man who only lets a chosen few into his private gallery, filled with rare and valuable pieces. You see a man walking with a firm step and a briefcase through the illuminated hallways. His demeanor is serious, that of someone who knows what he is doing. And the man stops in front of the elevator. It is Yu Song-gun, an A-class hunter who works as the security curator for the guild. "They say there's a ghost," Yu Song-gun asks as he presses the button. He does seem very convinced by the stories the employees are telling. His partner, looking like he hasn't slept much, confirms the rumors. It seems the situation in Basement 5 is more serious than they imagined. They grab a quick coffee while discussing the case. It turns out they have already received 17 complaints about this incident in the last 2 weeks. They know Visible does care if what he collects is a monster, as long as it is art. The boss has very extravagant tastes. The gallery building has been the scene of several screams lately. In this world, ghosts almost always end up being dangerous monsters. Still, incidents with ghosts are not rare, Yu Song-gun comments. What intrigues him is why there are so many reports at once on this occasion. The Human Resources Department has tried to keep the rumors from leaving the building so as not to alarm customers and the public, but there is no guarantee they can keep the secret for long. Yu Song-gun can already smell that a bunch of overtime hours are coming his way. He grips his glass tightly while he thinks. He is used to dealing with strange problems, but this one seems to have a very different tint. "What do you want me to do?" Yu Song-gun asks with a sharp gaze. He is already in professional mode, ready to investigate thoroughly. His partner tells him that he is someone very reliable and that he has tremendous respect for how he handles these crisis situations. "I wish you'd accept being the administrative manager," the other says with a smile. Yu Song-gun just laughs and says that is asking too much of him. It turns out that Yu Song-gun was formerly a leader of an investigation team at the Hunters Association. The guy has an enviable resume. He remembers that he didn't leave on the best of terms. Many looked down on him when he decided to leave the association for the private sector. "I don't want to stand out too much," Yu Song-gun admits with a sigh. He just wants to do his current job without drawing anyone's attention. They know that if the rumors leak, the gallery's reputation will suffer. They have to prepare a quick response for the guild leader. The Tartner hands him a folder with all the testimonies of the witnesses who have seen the ghost. It is time to review the facts. If the reports say the first sighting was at 4:32 a.m., the witness was a 24-year-old with no health problems. The description of the ghost is very specific. Almost 190 meters tall, good physique, pale skin, and wearing a black cape. She even made a drawing based on the testimony of an employee. According to her, the ghost is extremely handsome, a very curious detail. The report details that it is difficult to maintain eye contact with him, but everyone insists on his attractiveness. And the strangest thing is that he makes absolutely no noise when moving. Yu Song-gun flips through the pages and sees that all the reports agree on the same thing. This is not a hallucination. Everyone has seen exactly the same thing. This monster, despite being disguised as an exhibit piece, doesn't seem interested in hiding, Yu Song-gun thinks, analyzing the case. His partner nods as they continue to review the papers. The entity is not afraid to show itself, and that is what worries them both the most. Yu Song-gun frowns as he analyzes the reports. He finds it extremely strange that such an entity has appeared so many times without causing a single casualty among the employees. How would you like to see Yu Song-gun's investigation proceed, or should we focus on Jokor's reaction to being caught in the gallery? He knows perfectly well that, as a general rule, everything that emerges from the dungeons is hostile toward humanity. Up until now, there had not been a single exception to that survival rule. If such a monster really existed, it would be headline news across the entire globe. Media outlets would lose their minds over a discovery of such magnitude, but before the public could ever find out, the Hunters Association would have already locked it away under 1,000 keys as a top priority research specimen. Yu Song-gun points to a specific point in the report, visibly irritated. And what is this about it giving people gifts, he asks his partner in total disbelief. According to the testimonies collected, when someone encounters the ghost, it asks to strike up a conversation as if it were a normal, everyday person. It even introduces itself as Jokor. The entity seems to genuinely believe it is human. The report adds that after the initial greeting, the ghost asks to exchange names with the staff member. Even though the employee is under immense pressure and does not even dare to meet its gaze, Jokor continues the conversation with absolute calm and courtesy. The most unsettling part is that the chat is perfectly mundane. It does not ask for deep personal information, and if a human appears reluctant to speak, the entity does not insist. And the conversation concludes successfully. Something unexpected happens. The ghost hands a small gift to the human with whom it has just interacted. His partner points to an appendix in the investigation folder with a cautionary expression. Wait until you see what kind of gifts it leaves behind, he tells Yu Song-gun. Yu Song-gun's eyes widen in shock as he reviews the photographs in the report. This is, he exclaims, unable to credit what he is seeing. He falls silent for a moment, processing the information received. His initial surprise quickly transforms into deep professional confusion regarding the absurdity of the case. Here are sweets, cookies, lollipops, boxes of chocolates. What kind of domestic little monster is this? Yu Song-gun thinks, totally baffled by the nature of the gifts. Have you analyzed the components? Yu Song-gun asks. His assistant explains that the guild leader used some prisoners to test the food immediately. Visible has no scruples when it comes to his experiments. It seems he went back to borrowing them from the jail, Yu Song-gun comments with a gesture of annoyance. He strokes his chin thoughtfully while looking at the assistant. Well, was there poison in those sweets? He asks, expecting the worst. To his surprise, the answer is negative. And on the contrary, they turned out to be high-quality medicine. The other employee responds with an expression of absolute bewilderment. Yu Song-gun is left speechless by the revelation. The report details that the sweets were, in reality, precise remedies for anemia, digestion, or potent painkillers. Each gift matched exactly the ailment of the employee who received it. The investigation team still does not understand how such common food items can possess such medicinal properties. And the more I hear, the more problematic this monster sounds, Yu Song-gun thinks. His class A hunter instinct tells him that a creature like this is extremely dangerous. Not only is it capable of perceiving the state of health of living beings with precision, but it can also create objects capable of affecting them directly. Furthermore, it managed to bypass all the guild's high-level security and installed itself in the private gallery as if it were just another piece of the art exhibit. It means Jokor is an expert at hiding his presence. The gallery has been wrapped in a mysterious phenomenon that no one in the guild has been able to decipher. It is almost certainly a very high-ranking monster. Yu Song-gun concludes with a somber look filled with reasonable suspicion. The creature shows goodwill toward humans only complicates matters further. Shun-gun would prefer 1,000 times over that it had simply gone crazy and attacked. The supposed goodwill shown by dungeon civilizations is something that terrifies experienced hunters because of the dark historical precedents that exist. 11 years ago, delegations from various nations were sent to attempt to establish diplomatic contact with a civilization from another dimension, which in every one of the delegates returned to the human world transformed into what scientists of the time termed healthy malformations. For that civilization, the human body was inefficient, so out of pure goodwill, they decided to radically improve the bodies of the envoys, an absolute horror. For that reason, since that day, all beings coming from the dungeons are automatically classified as enemies, regardless of their apparent good intentions. Shun-gun closes the folder with professional determination. This ghost will be a difficult mission, but he will take charge of it. After all, it is his specialty. The other employee thanks him with a smile of pure relief. He knows that if Yu Song-gun accepts the case, the odds of success for the guild increase drastically. Yu Song-gun turns to leave, carrying his briefcase. However, his partner stops him for a second because there is still one crucial detail he must know. It concerns exactly when these incidents started, the employee explains. Yu Song-gun waits for the elevator to reach his floor. He reflects, everything started on the exact day that the guild leader, Bisabul, decided to exhibit the mysterious portrait of Jokor in the building's 5th basement. Yu Song-gun remembers that day perfectly while the elevator doors close in front of him. It was the beginning of all his current headaches. Bisabul appeared with his usual air of superiority and extravagance, ordering Yu Song-gun to take immediate charge of the management of a new piece. Its boss was euphoric, moving from one side to the other, surrounded by ancient treasures while calling out for Yu Songgun at the top of his lungs through the gallery hallways. Yu Songgun, a new management task for a new and fascinating piece, the guild leader repeated with a maniacal, playful smile loaded with ambition. Isabel raised his wine glass with elegance, his yellow eyes glowing with pure emotion. This masterpiece is called The Portrait of Jokor. Shongun's assistant watches him with deep pity from afar, knowing that his boss has become trapped in another of leader Bisabol's obsessive crazes. Yu Songun observes the elevator doors closing while his mind wanders to the orders he just received. His expression reflects the resignation of someone who knows a very long night awaits him. As he descends into the deeper levels of the gallery, Songun cannot help but let out a sigh. His boss Bisabol's eccentricities always end up falling upon his shoulders. Upon finally arriving at the 5th basement, Songun pulls a sweet from his pocket with a mechanical gesture. This isn't just a bit of extra work, he mutters to himself with a mixture of weariness and annoyance. Their time was more than guaranteed, he thinks with rage while biting the lollipop hard, breaking it into pieces as a way to release the frustration accumulated by his boss's whims. The elevator indicator marks level F5. Songun steps out into the dark hallway with an aura of professional determination, ready to face the mystery hidden in this private section. He quickly checks his phone to verify the time. It is exactly 4:29 a.m. Curator Yu Songgun formally begins the search for the enigmatic portrait of Jokor. Songun stops abruptly upon perceiving an unusual presence in the environment. His blue eyes glow with a cold, intense light in the middle of the hallway's gloom. It appeared, he whispers with caution. At the end of the corridor, a tall, mysterious figure wrapped in a heavy black cape remains motionless. A strange white glow seems to radiate from the entity's position, illuminating the nearby objects. Black cape, dark hair, bare feet, and a height of approximately 18.8 centimeters. Yu Songun analyzes mentally. Every visual trait matches perfectly with the data collected in the staff reports. Serving from his hiding place behind a large vase, Songun reflects on the creature's behavioral pattern. He finds it very suspicious that it only manifests at dawn when surveillance is minimal. It suggests that the entity is aware of being watched or that there are very specific metaphysical conditions that dictate when and how it can act on the physical plane of the gallery. Is it shy or simply cunning? Yu Songun wonders while preparing his gear. Since it is a humanoid-looking entity, he leans toward thinking it is an intelligent and calculating being. He checks his digital notes again. Because Jokor's appearance cycle has been very irregular until now, Songun feels fortunate to have found it on his first search attempt. He activates a technological skill in his earpiece to amplify the ambient sounds to the maximum. For today, I will limit myself to observing. They said it was so silent it seemed like a real ghost, didn't they? Suddenly, the earpiece captures an unexpected vibratory frequency that makes his skin crawl. Shinwin reacts. Genuine surprise, sensing that something in the basement's atmosphere has shifted drastically, the researcher walks through the museum, his heightened senses picking up everything. He notes that he has exceptionally sharp hearing. He claims he can even hear the rustling of individual blades of grass, a sound so subtle it should be imperceptible. Yet clearly, such heightened senses do not fit with someone who stands nearly 190 meters tall. The investigator stands frozen, a cold drop of sweat rolling down his temple as he keeps watch. Jokor, admiring the paintings as if he were just another visitor. Nan wonders if it is because Jokor is intelligent that he does even touch the works, merely observing them. He stands there, motionless before a vase. Perhaps he is just killing time, or perhaps he is searching for an object that might serve a purpose, the researcher thinks, never taking his eyes off the figure. Under the hood, Jokor wears that calm, somewhat melancholy expression. Suddenly, he looks up and lets out a simple ah. The researcher panics, his hand flying to his earpiece. Your gazes finally lock, and the atmosphere becomes suffocatingly heavy. What he sees is not a boy. It is a dark mass with eyes that resemble bottomless pits. The poor man falls backward, totally terrified by that overwhelming presence. He feels a visual impact that leaves his mind blank, unable to comprehend what he is witnessing. What is this? He asks himself. He notes that it is too black, yet it glimmers in a strange way. In the midst of that dark, distant center that sends shivers down his spine, he feels something enormous watching him. He's convinced that something exists inside, lurking. Fear takes complete hold, and he remains paralyzed before what he perceives. The investigator retreats at full speed, desperate to flee from that darkness. He ends up on the floor, trembling like a leaf and breathing heavily. He cannot even react from the sheer fright of crossing gazes with that entity. He shoots away from there, his feet barely touching the ground as he flees. He runs through the halls as if chased by the devil himself, leaving the museum room behind, escaping the portrait as quickly as possible. Back in its place, the painting of Jokor looks normal again, as if nothing strange had happened. The researcher gasps with a manic smile, shouting that the entity hid itself. He laughs nervously, saying this situation is going to drive him crazy, wondering if he provoked it all for nothing. Meanwhile, inside the forest, Jokor lies in the grass, sighing from the fright the human gave him. He wonders why that person was hiding in such a place watching him. He stays there pondering if perhaps the human was afraid of him. He remembers that every employee who has seen him has run away without looking back. He looks at the frame from within his world and wonders if it appeared as though he were the one fleeing. He knows he must try harder to appear as a harmless portrait to avoid making misunderstandings worse. Suddenly, a three-eyed rabbit approaches him with curiosity. Jokor observes the little animal, feeling a premonition that the human will return soon. He attempts to reach out his hand carefully to pet it, but the rabbit jumps and moves away, leaving him with his hand outstretched. He sighs, realizing that the animals come near him but flee the moment he tries to touch them. Such is the wild life, he thinks. He closes his fist, wishing he had a pet he could freely hug and cherish. He looks at the empty canvas in his room, sighing at the solitude in which he lives. Inside, the portrait remains there, keeping the secret of this artist who only seeks company. Here's Yu Song-gun standing before the portrait, trying to calm his nerves after what happened the day before. The man stares at the painting in silence, processing the entire situation before him. He thought that thing had hidden forever after yesterday's encounter, but it couldn't have been more wrong. He tells himself that the real work starts right now. There is no turning back. He is convinced that this portrait is no ordinary monster, and he must uncover its rules as soon as possible. His mission is clear: determine what Jokor is and whether it is possible for humans to coexist with such an entity. He admits that just standing there, looking into those eyes, he feels the strength draining from his entire body. He remembers how, after the great catastrophe, the world was filled with monsters whose history had to be stripped away. Since one doesn't always win on the first try, humans have no choice but to study these entities in order to survive. Out of nowhere, the Jokor in the painting breaks the ice and asks him if he wants to talk. Yu Song-gun does not shrink away. With an educated smile, he says yes, he would love to converse. He knows that in today's world, understanding these beings is the only way to stay safe. It is pure survival. Inside his world, Jokor is moved. He thinks Yu Song-gun is a very pleasant fellow. He is surprised that despite being scared yesterday, the researcher shows not a hint of fear in front of a talking painting. And moreover, the man even worries about his feelings. Jokor labels him an exemplary citizen immediately. Yu Song-gun starts by apologizing for yesterday, which finally wins the artist's trust. Jokor thinks that in a world where people fight monsters the size of a house, a talking portrait is the most normal thing in the world. Jokor tells him not to worry, that there is no need to apologize for what happened. And then painting asks the question, "May I know your name?" Things get tense there because Song-gun knows that in these times, giving your real name is a dangerous gamble. He knows that soul-binding contracts depend heavily on exchanged names. It is a high risk. Here's Jokor might trap him in some strange contract, but he decides to trust the rules the portrait has displayed. In the end, he concludes that Jokor does not seem like the type of being who would do something evil just because he knows who he is. So, he introduces himself formally. "I am Yu Song-gun," he says with all the confidence he can muster. Jokor smiles and tells him it is obvious he has a question spinning around in his head. Jung goes straight to the point. He asks if the one he crossed paths with yesterday was really him, recalling that dark, terrifying silhouette he saw in the darkness of the gallery recently. Jokor confirms that it was, and Song-gun is stunned to see how honest the portrait is. And then he drops the bomb. "That means you can leave that painting directly." Jokor, with all the calm in the world, replies that yes, he can do it without problems. Yu Song-gun is completely thrown off, and Jokor notices he has made the man nervous. He didn't expect a non-human entity to release such important information so easily without a second thought. He asks why he told him, and Jokor simply replies, "Because you asked me." To Jokor, there was no reason to hide it, but Song-gun wonders what would have happened if his intentions were bad. "That is a lie," the painting says, leaving Yu Song-gun speechless and a bit rigid. Jokor tells him that he is a kind and polite person, and that is why he decided to talk to him. That is enough of an answer for him. Song-gun swallows hard, realizing that this being can distinguish perfectly between who is good and who is not. He wonders what would happen if someone evil stood before him. Would he simply ignore them, or would he attack? Jokor interrupts his thoughts and asks if he has any other questions. The man reacts quickly. Yu Song-gun says yes, there is something else he wants to confirm regarding the gallery events. He remembers the rumors of the ghost wandering around handing out delicious gifts to people. He stares at the portrait and asks directly, "Is that ghost you?" Jokor, observing from within his world, asks if he always carries art supplies with him. It is as if he already expected it. Song-gun admits that he does. In this gallery, you never know what you might run into, so he prefers to be ready for anything. He notes that it is for his own safety, though what is happening right now is the ultimate proof that his precaution was worth it. Jokor remains silent for a long time after being called a ghost. Standing before the painting, Yu Song-gun starts to worry that he has put his foot in his mouth and offended the entity with his comment. Without thinking twice, Yu Song-gun offers a sincere apology for his lack of tact. Inside his world of oil and brushstrokes, Jokor perfectly understands that anyone would be scared of a talking painting. He admits it is logical to call him a ghost, given how strange his existence is within that canvas. However, Jokor drops a blunt truth to clarify things. "I have never died." Yu Song-gun, his curiosity piqued, asks if he was always a painting and why he was haunting the gallery. Jokor explains that he was simply curious about his new surroundings after suddenly transforming into a painting and being moved there. The rare art pieces that surrounded him in the gallery piqued his interest, becoming his only distraction. He felt a genuine fascination for the people who worked in that place, observing them attentively from his frame. He wondered what kind of lives those humans led in their day-to-day, far from the canvases. He wanted to know their names and their tastes, seeking a trace of normality in a world that has changed drastically. He confesses that when one is plunged into solitude, it is natural to seek someone with whom to exchange a few words. Yu Song-gun listens in silence, noting that Jokor's interest in humans has a strangely dry tone, almost like a monster. Jokor adds that he prefers, 1,000 times over, to talk to someone educated and kind like the researcher before him right now. Yu Song-gun flashes a light smile, appearing to fit perfectly into that description of an educated person that pleases Jokor. The portrait confesses that he prefers the The gallery staff, he notes, clearly prefer working with him rather than the leader in bright red, referring to Visible. After hearing this, Yu Song-gun comes to the internal conclusion that Jokor is actually quite a talker. Jokor remarks that the guild leader speaks so much that it is often difficult to find a moment to respond. The situation amuses Yu Song-gun, who imagines that Jokor has already had his fair share of clashes with the temperamental guild leader. He recalls his boss, Visible, who curiously provided very little information about this particular assignment. Song-gun apologizes on behalf of his leader, admitting that the man is, to say the least, quite unusual. Jokor observes the investigator and decides that, despite the circumstances, Yu Song-gun does not seem to be a bad person. Song-gun notes with astonishment that Jokor is not hostile, even toward people, provided he does not judge them as evil. Until he stares fixedly at the golden frame, one question continues to hammer at his mind. What is this thing, really? And the emblem on Yu Song-gun's clothing glows faintly as he processes everything he has discovered about the portrait. Breaking the silence once more, the portrait of Jokor asks if he still has any other doubts to resolve. Jong wants to know if the painting can see everything, even when he has his eyes closed within the painting. He wonders to himself what motivates such a being to want to maintain contact with humans. Jokor compares it to looking out the window of a bus on the way to Seoul. He simply observes how the outside world moves. He explains that the moment the portrait opens its eyes is when he feels a genuine desire to communicate with the outside. The rest of the time, Jokor limits himself to observing from the safety of his painted world, just as he once confirmed in that burned-out school. Yu Song-gun is left processing the analogy, seeing the situation from a totally new and unexpected perspective. His gaze becomes intense. For him, the idea of moving paintings is fascinating yet terrifying. I see, the investigator murmurs, finally beginning to fit all the pieces of this strange puzzle together. He looks at the empty frame and reflects on whether the humans outside are, to Jokor, the true figures of a painting. Song-gun admits with a smile that Jokor's direct and frank way of speaking has caught him completely off guard. Jokor replies that he was simply trying to be polite and mind his manners. Song-gun reflects on the importance of manners in the interaction between humans and unknown entities. A look of serenity and satisfaction crosses the investigator's face after having clarified his main doubts. He concludes to himself that, against all initial odds, it has been a most pleasant chat. On his mobile screen, the digits mark 9 o'clock, signaling that the time for the interview is up. Yu Song-gun bursts into the office, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Guild leader, that thing is dangerous!" On the other side of the desk, Visible remains impassive, calmly enjoying a cup of tea in his office. With a smug smile and an air of total superiority, the leader asks calmly, "What is it that is so dangerous?" Yu Song-gun enters hurriedly, carrying his briefcase, and exclaims, "I'm talking about that portrait. It is completely different from any monsters we have seen." The investigator continues his warning, recalling how other monsters suffocated people with their supposed goodwill. What worries Yu Song-gun most is that the being inhabiting the canvas genuinely identifies itself as a human being. He admits that he cannot be sure if Jokor truly believes it or merely longs for it, but he warns that these situations often appear harmless. Meanwhile, in the background, a dark silhouette lurks. Song-gun adds that if something were to go wrong, the consequences would be unimaginable. He highlights that the portrait has its own concept of good and evil and judges others according to its personal standards. Yu Song-gun asks his boss directly if he has considered the option of sending the work to the Hunters Association to be investigated. Visible, far from being worried, whistles amusedly and comments that the more he listens, the more he feels that his subordinate is a kind-hearted person. With an expression of annoyance, the investigator listens as the leader asks him to keep talking to Jokor and even introduce him to the entity. Yu Song-gun lets out a sigh of resignation and complies with his leader's personal request, stating that he will simply do his job. In a comical exchange, Visible wonders why his employees are so indifferent, and Yu Song-gun replies that he is the one who recruits them that way. The narrative reveals that the obsession of Visible, the guild leader, with collecting was not limited exclusively to objects. It is explained that all the collector's employees were people he had personally trained with stubbornness and transferred to his service. Yu Song-gun knows that regardless of the hunter's rank, Visible never recruited anyone without being completely sure of their character. He reflects that if the portrait's presence is capable of pressuring people with such strong willpower, its soul must be extraordinary. Returning to formality, Yu Song-gun informs his superior that he will be sending detailed reports periodically. Visible gives him permission to leave with a sly smile, while Yu Song-gun wonders if that man is planning something dangerous. Jokor, observing from within his world, asks if he always carries art supplies with him. It is as if he already expected it. Song-gun admits that he does. In this gallery, you never know what you might run into, so he prefers to be ready for anything. He notes that it is for his own safety, though what is happening right now is the ultimate proof that his precaution was worth it. He wonders what would have happened if he hadn't brought his things. Just thinking about it makes his skin crawl. He finishes drawing the apple. It is no masterpiece. It is a simple, somewhat clumsy sketch, but there it is. Song-gun feels a bit awkward showing off his talent in front of an expert like Jokor. He knows it isn't much, but then Jokor says thank you, and out of nowhere, he stretches his hand from inside the frame to take the fruit. Shungun's jaw drops. He cannot believe what his eyes are seeing. Jokor is physically interacting with his drawing, and without hesitation, Jokor takes a bite. The sound of the fruit crunching resonates throughout the room. Junju's brain short circuits. He is eating it, he thinks, completely beside himself. The apple, which a second ago was just paint, is now real food disappearing into the mouth of a portrait. Songun can hardly hide his shock. He ate the apple that I drew myself, he exclaims in his mind as his heart beats 1,000 times a minute. He starts to break out in a cold sweat. He knows this breaks every law of logic and magic he has known until now. Never in his life as a hunter has he faced something so absurd and fascinating at the same time. Jokor savors the fruit calmly and says it is delicious, that it has a perfect aroma. Songun looks at his cheap paints. How is it possible that something drawn with them now has flavor and even smells like a fresh apple? Jokor explains his logic. If he is an ordinary human who simply lives inside a painting, then he should be able to do normal things like eating. He even confesses that on days he doesn't feel like cooking, he simply draws a finished plate and has it for dinner. Songun swallows hard, processing the information. He knows perfectly well that a normal human cannot do any of that. Jokor notices and asks him with total tranquility, "Does it really seem so strange to you?" Jokor decides he wants to reward Songun for his kindness in drawing the apple for him. Does he want to return the favor? Songun is left thoughtful. How is he going to pay me? He wonders, trying to guess what madness Jokor will come up with next. Jokor thinks to himself that Songun is truly a good person. Not just anyone would play along with a portrait asking for food. He remembers that since he woke up inside the frame, he has been testing his limits. He even tried painting precious stones to see what would happen. He converted those gems into pigments and started painting with them, experimenting with colors and textures, and the result was incredible. The paintings seemed to have a life of their own, glowing with an intensity he had never seen. His brushstrokes loaded with that energy, he felt he could create anything, even things that should be dead but emitted heat. It seemed that nothing was impossible for him inside that canvas, but he always had the doubt of what would happen if he connected his art to the reality outside. Suddenly, he starts painting something new over Songun's portrait, covering his face with messy red strokes. Songun observes the painting seriously, waiting to see what kind of trick Jokor is going to perform. At the time, a system interface appears before him. Offer Hunter Yu Songun a symbol of gratitude. The time starts to tick, and within the red spots of the drawing, something bright and solid begins to materialize, pulsing with energy. The gem finishes forming and floats out of the frame, landing softly in the real world. Young catches it between his hands and is left speechless upon feeling the immense power emanating from that precious stone. Jokor looks at him from the canvas and says simply, "Here you have a token of my gratitude." Songun inspects the gem closely. It is a crystal of unknown origin loaded with a strange vibration. He cannot believe that Jokor created something like this just by drawing it. He asks Jokor what kind of gem it is exactly, trying to understand the magnitude of what he has in his hands. Jokor admits he doesn't know for sure, but says it must have come from the deepest part of the earth, from a place so hot it would burn anyone. The gem was born in a place as fiery as the planet's core, absorbing all that intense heat. Songun observes the gem with astonishment, realizing that this portrait is by no means an ordinary monster. Analyzing the gem, Songun murmurs to himself, "The root," trying to connect the pieces of this enigma. Later, Songun shares his findings with someone else, explaining that these are the results of his observations so far. He explains that the root is a transcendent being that maintains the balance of every universe and dimension, creating the rules for everything that exists. It is a kind of supreme system, the god of all gods, the source from which all existence emanates. The dungeons that appeared on Earth 30 years ago are actually stories of new dimensions that were born from the vein of the root. Each of these worlds has its own logic and origin, all connected by that primordial energy. In the same way, monsters emerged inside those dungeons as part of that creative process. It is something only the gardeners know, a secret that completely changes the perception of their reality. Songun continues explaining that monsters are born from dungeons, while the children of the root are born directly from the original source. They differ in origin and nature, but Jokor does not fit into either of those two categories. The most surprising thing is that Jokor not only exists, but is capable of creating other beings besides himself. Dater listens attentively while holding the gem with a handkerchief. A small water bird flutters near Songun, one of Jokor's creations. Songun observes with astonishment how these small creatures interact with the world. They are beings that Jokor considers his new family. Jokor confesses that he has taken a liking to this and is trying to create several of them so as not to feel so alone. But inside his own portrait, one can see small glowing birds flying around, giving life to the painted landscape. Songun asks him if he really drew them all. These beings, of which there seem to be so many in his world, are quite noisy despite lacking real vocal cords. Jokor confirms that there are around 100 of them, and his face looks melancholy as he is surrounded by his small liquid creations. Sometimes they gather in such numbers that they form a small pond within the scene of the painting. These birds love to tuck various objects inside their transparent bodies to decorate themselves, each with their own personal tastes, and it is amusing to watch them like that. Songun watches Jokor with a serious and somber expression. There's something about his creative capacity that he finds deeply unsettling, and he notices that Songun does not refer to them as simple drawings, but as if they were truly alive. Do these birds have souls? Songun wonders. This goes far beyond what a normal monster could ever do. Jokor hesitates for a moment. Even he is not entirely sure of the depth of his own creation. Children of the root do not have egos. They cannot carry on a conversation like the one they are having right now. They are something entirely different from the creatures of the dungeons. Shungun tells Jokor that although he is a painting, he is simultaneously human and a being capable of affecting reality directly. Jokor's silhouette is wrapped in a burning aura, yet Songun feels no divinity in him, so it is unlikely that Jokor is a god. He simply does not fit into any known mold. In a celestial vision, priests dressed in white appear, yet through his drawings, Jokor can create destiny, a past, and memories. Shungun asks him a crucial question. Could you create real people too? If he were doing all of that on his own, then it would be simply incredible. Jokor lowers his gaze, thoughtful within his golden frame. He responds that perhaps it is possible, or perhaps not, but the truth is that he doesn't even want to try. His gaze is distant and somewhat sad. Creating human beings seems like something deeply unsettling to him. He feels that it is something too special, and he does not consider himself to be such a special person. The portrait of Jokor seems more melancholy than ever. Shungun walks through the gallery like a glowing silhouette amidst a forest of dark branches, reflecting on Jokor's words. Jokor asks him please not to think of him as someone too special. He would prefer that he not see him in that way. I will be careful, Songun responds with solemnity. Shungun stands pensive in the middle of the gallery's grand hall with his suitcase in hand, his mind filled with doubts about what he has just discovered. The doctor asks Shungun if he is truly not considering sending the portrait to the Association for Study, clearly intrigued. The doctor admits that the only thing he can understand for now is the history of the portrait, but he has no idea of the exact techniques it uses or the extent of its soul's depth. A somewhat sly smile crosses his face. There are too many unanswered questions about the role Jokor plays within the root. The doctor looks at him with intense yellow eyes, analyzing every word Songun speaks. Shungun reflects on whether it would be best for humanity to let the association analyze the portrait, considering that Jokor's effect on the world is still unknown. He walks with his hands in his pockets, hesitant. The doctor smiles from ear to ear. His expression is that of someone who has very different plans for Jokor's future. Here, Shungun asks in a condescending tone if he has already forgotten the tasks for which he was hired in the first place. I am not the type of person who wants that, am I? The doctor adds while reviewing some documents. With a theatrical gesture and a laugh filled with ambition, the doctor proclaims that he does not want weapons. What he is looking for are works of art. His eyes shine with barely contained madness. That is the true reason why he founded this guild and this company. The doctor points forward with determination, showing off his multiple gold rings and a triumphant smile. His ambition has no limits. Isabel declares with arrogance that although he has some pride as an artist, as a hunter, he does not possess even the slightest shred. Surrounded by his acquisitions in a room with a heavy atmosphere, he explains that no collector simply looks for protection or pleasant dreams in art. What truly fascinates him is the story that lives within each painting, and he is determined to preserve it completely under his control. Shungun listens in silence, sitting in front of the wall where the mysterious portrait hangs, absorbing his employer's obsession. Shungun looks uneasy. His eyes reflect a mixture of astonishment and concern at the direction things are taking. On the contrary, Visible's yellow gaze shines with a predatory intensity, fixed on his next great objective. With a smile that borders on manic, he asks Shungun if he doesn't understand yet. What is coming is something that no one will be able to stop. In the dim light of the gallery, the portrait of Jokor seems to observe the world, charged with the potential that they are only just beginning to glimpse. A vibrant and chaotic energy flows in the air, suggesting that the connection between Jokor and the root is deeper than they imagined. Isabel suggests that, although this phenomenon might look like a natural disaster, they have been lucky enough that it shows goodwill toward them. Meanwhile, in a calmer environment, hands prepare small spheres of food next to brightly colored crystals. Shungun reflects on the incredible luck of having found Jokor, considering his existence an almost absurd miracle. A small water creature born from Jokor's drawings floats gently above the table, reminding them of the magical nature of its origin. With a gesture of surprise, Songun begins to connect the pieces of why Bisabal was so interested in acquiring the portrait. He is aware that after appearing in an auction, Jokor's secret will not take long to be revealed to the rest of the world. Isabel affirms that his rapid intervention was necessary to get ahead of any possible catastrophe that could arise in the process. The guild leader boasts of having a privileged vision, assuring that he is capable of seeing much more than others. Suddenly, a small aquatic being jumps playfully into a container of liquid, spilling part of the content. Jun observes, stunned, as the liquid spilled on the table begins to stir and take on a defined shape. Before his eyes, a honeybird manifests, a small golden creature that emits a bubbling sound as it comes to life. Isabel ends the conversation by urging Songun to think big, reminding him that a gardener should not have such a closed mind. Jokor looks calm, but for Bisabal, the guild leader, Jokor is much more than a simple painting. He is a truly kind person. Bisabal laughs while showing off his rings. He says that Jokor does not mind being bothered, and that makes him special. As we look at a painting of a cozy house, the leader explains that Jokor is always polite and respects others without imposing rules. The most curious thing is that, despite his immense power, Jokor is afraid of hurting someone. The man stares out the window, thinking that for someone like Jokor, killing a human should be like stepping on an ant. Isabel comments to Yu Shungun, his mentor and curator, that Jokor is too good for this world. It is clear that Bisabal has the makings of a leader. Just by looking Jokor in the eyes, he knew what kind of power he was dealing with. He gives a clear order to Songun. Do not try to read his thoughts, and do not make him angry. The Character Guild skyscraper rises in the city. The order is simple. Songun should be a good companion to Jokor and take him out for walks from time to time. Jokor listens to this and cannot help but wonder if they are serious. Isabel snaps his fingers, ending the meeting with that smile of confidence. Jokor retreats, carrying his art briefcase, resigned to following the guild's rules for now. Before leaving, Jokor assures the leader that he will trust him, or rather, he will trust his good eye for things. Yellow eyes shine in the darkness, seeing what the rest of the humans completely ignore. Isabel sits at his desk, relaxed after having secured his new star acquisition. He orders his people to give Jokor the best service possible. He does not want him to feel uncomfortable. Jokor walks alone through the night streets, surrounded by lights and giant buildings. Inside, Jokor smiles with relief. He did not expect an entity of the root to be so easy to deal with. He remembers that the research done in other places is practically abuse, and he prefers to be here. It turns out that Yu Songun, the guy accompanying him, used to be a gardener in this world. A root entity called Garden chooses someone to take care of it. His gardeners gave their souls to their labor because the difficulty of the dungeons depended on their care. Jokor walks through the cold, feeling a natural curiosity for this new environment that surrounds him. Suddenly, he stops in front of a street stall selling bunjiopang, those fish-shaped breads that are almost never seen anymore. In an old portrait, we see Yu Songun, who, according to Jokor, really enjoys food. Jokor stands there in front of the stall, watching the steam rise from the griddle. Songun thinks that if Jokor believes he is human, the best thing to do is to help him maintain that idea for as long as possible. The breadfish are turning golden brown. Songun believes that the respect Jokor shows comes precisely from that confusion of identity. The bag full of warm bread and a smile, Jokor asks Songun how old he is. In the painting, Songun responds with total seriousness that he is 29 years old. Jokor lets out a chuckle, revealing that he is already 33. He feels like the older brother. Songun's face is. Jokor is stunned, unable to believe that this ancestral being is technically younger than he appears. Songun turns away, sounding slightly offended as he mentions that people always tell him he looks older, but that this particular comment actually stung. Jokor quickly tries to smooth things over, explaining that he simply didn't expect someone as highly respected by Visible to be under 30. As they walk down the hall of portraits, Songun wonders if Jokor's perception of age is just another one of his mental quirks. To be clear, Jokor is 33 and Songun is 29. Even though their appearances suggest the opposite, they continue walking, enjoying the pleasant aroma of the snacks. In the portrait, Songun admits that it is quite interesting to hear that he looks young, especially coming from someone like Jokor. They decide to set aside formalities. Songun likes the idea of speaking to each other as friends. Jokor offers him the bag of bread with a bright smile, calling it a gift to seal their newfound friendship. A cosmic image of an energy-filled hand flashes before us. The concept of the root is merely a fragment of what a person truly is. Jokor looks at us with a cunning smile, as if he knows that being a gardener is only the beginning of his new purpose. Songun listens to Jokor's stories with a smile, though he warns him that maintaining a garden is anything but easy. It is a job that has claimed many lives, a place where stress never lets you rest. We catch a glimpse of the interior of a luxurious palace as Songun explains that even if you are chosen, the burden is immense. Jokor listens intently from his painting, processing every word about this new world. He asks if being a gardener is mandatory, something you simply must do if you are chosen. Songun pauses, thoughtful, as he adjusts his clothing. The curator explains that it is not something one can choose by their own will. Even though he works for the guild now, his title as a gardener is something he can never shake off. Suddenly, a hand reaches out from Jokor's painting, handing Songun some seeds. The curator is frozen in place. It is the first time he has seen something like this. Songun stares at the hand with astonishment while Jokor, with total naturalness, thanks him for accepting them. The tension in the air is palpable given such a casual display of power. Jokor asks him if all of this isn't too difficult for him. Songun, under the shadow of the trees in his mental garden, admits that it is, but that the effort is worth it. The curator walks through the hall, admitting that having a place of his own in this chaotic world is something wonderful, almost a miracle. When he closes his eyes, Songun can see snow-capped mountains and imposing glaciers. The scale of his vision is immense, reflecting the deep connection he has with his garden. The grandeur of what he sees captivates anyone. Chun smiles, knowing that possessing a fragment of beauty in this gray world is the greatest treasure of all. Jokor nods, saying that now he understands everything. Songun looks at him sideways, surprised by the rapid understanding of the entity that inhabits the canvas. Magical water birds appear fluttering over a small cabin in the woods. It is a scene of absolute peace that contrasts sharply with the danger of the dungeons. Songun holds one of these birds, which glows with a golden light, and admits that he feels the same way. The little bird emits a tender sound in his hands, and Jokor smiles from the shadows. It seems they have found common ground. The curator seems more relaxed now that they have shared this moment of sincerity. Shun stares fixedly at the painting and throws out a bold proposal. Wouldn't you like to go out a little and see the real world? He assures him that if he accepts, he himself will act as his guide. Jokor remains silent, considering the offer to explore Seoul. He wonders if it is a good idea to go sightseeing given what he is. He knows that proposing something like this to an entity of the root is not something to be taken lightly. Jun smiles with confidence, although deep down he knows that Jokor is a total mystery. He has no idea how Jokor will interact with reality once he is out of the frame. See the city at night full of skyscrapers. Isabel, the guild leader, knows that they cannot stop Jokor if he decides to go out, so the best thing to do is be prepared. Isabel shows his fangs with a calculating smile. He believes it is wise to learn about Jokor's powers before it is too late to react. Joker remarks to Songgun that it seems he doesn't know much about how things are outside. The curator returns his gaze, ready to show him the truth. Jokor thinks to himself that Songgun is right. He wonders if the moment has finally arrived to return to human society, even if just for a while. Looking at his portrait, Jokor wonders when would be a good time to take that big step. The doubt is reflected in his serious expression. The golden bird, nicknamed Honey, tilts its head with curiosity, watching Jokor lost in his thoughts while white flowers adorn the ground. The gloved hand drives a hoe into the dry earth. Jokor remembers that people outside seem to be afraid of him, and that worries him a little. See Jokor dressed as a farmer, crouched in a small vegetable patch. He assumes that when he goes out, his presence manifests in a way that normal humans cannot process well. A close-up of an eye shows a strange distortion. Jokor thinks he must look strange enough to scare anyone who looks him in the face. The honeybird flutters near Jokor as he continues working the land. He says that although it was disconcerting, he didn't feel bad, so Songgun shouldn't worry. While watering can pours water over the garden. As he already has plans to go out with Songgun, Jokor wants to resolve that difference in perception he has with others. Jokor wipes the sweat from his forehead, sighing. He wants his encounter with reality to be as normal as possible, without causing unnecessary panic. See the complete garden with the title, My Vegetable Garden. Jokor remembers that his grandmother always said that those who don't work don't eat. The honeybird perches on Jokor's hat, and Jokor tells him that he is already doing his part by being so adorable. The little bird seems satisfied. We see a close-up of a warm, bright golden bird. Jokor admits that it is a bit absurd that he has evolved enough to be able to talk, but he likes the change. Jokor walks through the garden with his gardening equipment, asking the little bird if he likes being like this. The response is a cheerful trill, and Jokor decides to give him a beautiful name. The little bird holds some shiny gems, looking very proud of his new nickname. Jokor looks at the bird softly, almost paternally. He is starting to get attached to the creatures he himself has helped flourish, but then he regrets it and says that sometimes his father says things that are beside the point. He admits that he had never seen a water creature remain so serious. He changes the name to Honey because he has a very sweet color. The bird shines with joy at the new name, fluttering over Jokor's gloved hand. We return to the view of the peaceful cabin by the river. Jokor thinks that Songgun is truly merciful for not hating this type of quiet life. We see an easel with a painting of a stormy sea. Jokor plans to finish his landscapes and then enjoy the deep sleep that comes after a long day of work. Jokor picks up a brush and prepares to paint. His gaze is full of determination, ready to capture his vision on the white canvas. The artist begins to make quick, sure brushstrokes. The sound of the brush against the canvas fills the studio while a new world begins to come to life under his hand. Jokor's brush glides over the canvas, creating realistic waves. The stroke seems to breathe life into the water, capturing the very essence of the sea. The result is a masterpiece, a deep, dark sea whose waters seem to move with a force of their own and mysterious power. It is more than just a painting. Dark figures walk down a hallway bathed in red and orange light as if they were surrounded by fire. The environment is oppressive and full of tension. A monstrous creature with sharp teeth emerges from the shadows, surrounded by a purple aura. The vision is terrifying and seems ripped from a nightmare. Another dark, twisted figure appears, wrapped in black and red flames. The atmosphere is chaotic, suggesting an imminent danger in this world of shadows. In the art studio, the paintings glow with magical light. The contrast between the peace of the workshop and Jokor's dark visions is overwhelming. Jokor rests on his bed, exhausted after his work. The room is in semi-darkness, reflecting his need for restorative sleep after creating entire worlds. Outside his window, one can see a picturesque house next to a pond where small beings of light flutter. It is a scene of absolute calm that contrasts with his dreams. Jokor opens one eye, waking up slowly. He still seems to be halfway between sleep and reality, processing what he just experienced in his mind. Suddenly, a system notification appears before him, startling him out of his lethargy. The message is clear. He has a new pending notification. Jokor sits up in bed, confused. He wonders why this is the first thing he sees upon opening his eyes, feeling that his quiet life is about to change again. A system displays his latest painting, Breathing Sea. The work has been recognized by a higher entity, giving it a weight that Jokor did not expect. Jokor reads the names that the system has given his paintings. Breathing Sea, Animal Kingdom, City of the Void. Names that capture perfectly what he felt while painting them. The young artist begins to understand the situation. The system has named the landscape paintings he finished yesterday, giving them an identity of their own. Discovering dimensions through landscape painting is something that leaves him deep in thought. He wonders if this power is truly something a human being should possess. Honey, the golden bird, perches on his shoulder, emitting a cheerful sound. Its presence is a small comfort amidst so many strange revelations. Jokor shrugs with a resigned smile. At the end of the day, it is fun, so he supposes it is fine. Despite how unusual it may be, he thinks that perhaps the system knew about his poor naming skills, and that is why it snatched away the opportunity for him to title his own works. He strokes Honey distractedly, wondering what terms like adapter and synchronization actually mean in this context. He knows they are key to understanding his new reality, so he asks his system to be honest and explain what an adapter is, his impatience to solve this mystery clear. The system explains that it is a method to understand unknown dimensions in a more convenient way. The core listens intently, trying to absorb every detail. Among the beings of the dimension shown, the target corresponding to Jokor is designated as an adapter. If consent is obtained, one can travel through that dimension. An image of an animal skull surrounded by exotic plants appears, a vision of another world. The complexity of what Jokor has created is fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The core wonders if this means that anyone with Joe in their name will serve this purpose. He sees portraits of Giovanni and Arjo on the system screen and remains pensive, analyzing the implications. He doesn't believe it is as simple as sharing a name. There must be something deeper at play. He looks at Giovanni's portrait, questioning what special conditions led these individuals to be selected by the system as adapters, conjecturing that it could be the result of testing their synchronization rate with him or simply their natural adaptability to these types of phenomena. The system points out that the dimension corresponding to the City of the Void does not exist yet. This surprises Jokor, giving him an idea of the magnitude of his creative power. The message asks, "Would you like to register it?" Jokor realizes he has just created a totally new dimension with a single stroke of his brush. He hits the button on the screen, accepting the registration. He feels his life becoming more and more incredible and cannot help but feel a spark of excitement. He tells Honey that life is an amazing thing and that if he doesn't enjoy this now, he wouldn't be human. He admits he doesn't know which of his comments made the bird go quiet. A new notification appears. Tip: resolution problem. The system always seems to be one step ahead, guiding or confusing him even further. Kerr looks at the screen with curiosity. He believes the path he is taking is the right answer, reaffirming his will to move forward with this new destiny. He touches Giovanni's portrait while reading the system's tip. For the resolution, make use of Jokor. The connection between him and the adapters becomes more evident. Suddenly, Jokor finds himself in a strange place bathed in a bluish light. It appears to be some kind of ancient laboratory or hospital room filled with jars and tools. He wonders where he is, noticing that Honey is not with him. A sudden change of scenery leaves him disoriented for a moment. The system confirms he is connected to Giovanni's mental world within the breathing sea. Jokor acknowledges that the system has been useful this time and observes the environment, which reminds him of an old hospital. The atmosphere is cold and clinical, suggesting that Giovanni's inner world is not exactly a cheerful place. A tall figure with long blonde hair appears in the room. It is the priest Giovanni, who seems to be in his own world, oblivious to the intruder's presence. Giovanni has a melancholy and distant expression. He wears an elegant white tunic, reflecting his status and his connection to the spiritual in this mental world. Kerr observes him carefully, noting that his face is surprisingly similar to his own. The feeling of familiarity is unsettling, yet fascinating. Finally, Jokor decides to speak and greets him with a simple, "Hello." The connection between the two sons is about to become much more real. Giovanni smiles with serenity, an expression that radiates peace. His blue eyes shine with a soft light as he prepares to speak. He introduces himself formally as Giovanni of the Batland family, with an elegant gesture of his hand over his chest. His bearing is noble and filled with an ancient dignity. Jokor introduces himself simply as Jokor, feeling a bit out of place in the face of such formality. He wonders if this man is truly the adapter the system spoke of. Jokor comments that Giovanni looks a lot like him, but with a foreign air. He analyzes his features, finding a strange visual connection between them. Giovanni nods with a kind smile, suggesting that they probably resemble each other in many other ways besides their physique. His voice is warm and reassuring. Jokor admits with a shake of his head that he doesn't think he could ever smile in such a kind way. He has always felt his expression was more rigid and serious. He remembers how people used to misunderstand his lack of a smile, thinking he had suffered some personal tragedy when in reality he was just lost in his own thoughts. He even went so far as to think he had performed dangerous jobs in the past because of his intense gaze. Jokor just wanted to be a normal student back then. He confesses that the only thing that really mattered to him was what he was going to eat after the lunch bell rang. His worries were much more mundane than others imagined. Giovanni laughs softly, comparing Jokor's honesty to that of his former students. He assures him that from now on he will be able to learn how to smile like him. Jokor remains pensive, staring into the void. He wonders if synchronization with Giovanni will really change his personality or his way of seeing the world. Giovanni explains that although he will seek his consent, synchronization implies that he will take Jokor's body and soul. The seriousness of his words contrasts with his gentle tone. Jokor asks him if he doesn't feel fear or resentment about being used in this way, just so someone can appreciate a new dimension. It is a deep and direct question. Giovanni responds that this is not a theft, as he is already dead. His voice shows no sadness, but a calm acceptance of his destiny. He explains that his soul has has already returned to the side of the sun, the origin of his faith and his power. He feels at peace with the idea that his essence will be used for a greater purpose. A close-up of Giovanni's blue eye shows a spark of hope. Despite being dead, there seems to be some life and purpose still within him. He reveals that his body could not be buried because all of his land was flooded by the seawater. An image of deep darkness illustrates the tragedy of his lost home. Sakura listens with an expression of astonishment and sadness. He begins to understand that the painting of the breathing sea has a much more painful connection than he imagined. Sakura asks in disbelief if his homeland was truly swallowed by the sea. Giovanni nods, confirming that his entire world perished beneath the waters, leaving him as the last witness to its glory. Giovanni drops the bombshell. His world was destroyed. Just like that, without anesthesia. He knows it is a very heavy story for someone he has just met, but he asks him to listen. He tells him that in that world, nothing remains, only sirens hidden under the sea. His planet shrank like a game board and turned into a dungeon with its own rules. Rikor remembers what Yusangun told him, dimensions that appeared out of nowhere after the great catastrophe. Giovanni explains that although he didn't know the concept, he understood everything when Jokor called him. Both share the same name. Rikor looks at him strangely while they float in that shared mental space. Patrice clarifies that they are not the same person, just two guys who by a miracle have much in common. Rikor listens seriously while the other continues with his mystical explanation. Giovanni proposes something crazy. Their souls will become one. A kind of resurrection or reincarnation. He promises to mix with him, spend time together, and create new memories within Jokor. And they will live like that within what he calls the root. The root? Jokor asks. He still doesn't quite grasp this whole business. Giovanni smiles. He knows it is a rare concept, but Jokor is already living there. Jokor mentions that he heard that name from an acquaintance, but that humans gave it that name for lack of anything better. He really knows what name that place has, nor what rules or form it truly possesses. Giovanni says that as a humble soul, the only thing he can do is answer Jokor's call, but he asks him for a huge favor, to take care of the sun god of his former world. Jokor points to himself, not understanding how someone so ordinary could take care of a god. He feels tremendous pressure. Giovanni laughs and tells him that he thought the same thing when he was alive. He explains that unless one is in the root, a god ends up being forgotten if he has no believers. Jokor only has to remember him from time to time and talk to him. Getting that in exchange, Jokor will be able to use his power. He promises it won't be a heavy burden. Giovanni looks very confident while Jokor remains thinking about the proposal. Jokor sums it up in his own way. It's like going to visit elderly people who live alone. I'm good at that, Jokor says. Giovanni rests easy hearing that. He remembers when he used to volunteer in a mountain village. Keeping the elderly company was a piece of cake. Giovanni feels relieved to leave his legacy in the hands of someone so kind. Suddenly, a name resonates in the air. Jokor repeats the name, confused by this new character entering the scene. It is the name of Giovanni's student, one of the few remaining in that sunken world. He asks Jokor to please give an ending to her story, not to save her, but to provide closure. The scene shifts to an idyllic landscape, but the calm is short-lived. Hennybird appears with a pair of glowing gems, seemingly having found a treasure. Jokor bows his head while the system notifies him of his new mission, Giovanni's quest. The little bird makes a sad sound upon seeing its master so dejected. Jokor tries to soothe it, but pain strikes him suddenly. Something is wrong. He feels as if his skin is being torn apart. The assimilation is truly beginning. The painting distorts with a dark, viscous energy that envelops everything. Jokor breaks into a cold sweat, overwhelmed by senses that do not belong to him. The fusion is brutal. The vision of the past appears. Giovanni sitting peacefully with two sirens on the beach. But the reality is a nightmare. The shrine with fangs laughs while the water churns violently. Giovanni weeps silently within his portrait, tears streaming down his face. His sorrow is evident. It seems the weight of his past has finally reached him. Giovanni sits on the ground, defeated, but murmurs that he regrets nothing. He covers his face while the tears continue to flow, confessing that despite everything, he was happy. The scene shifts to a lonely street under the moonlight. Someone mentions how terrible it is. Eyes. A pair of black heels with red soles walk firmly on the pavement. A solitary streetlight flickers in the middle of the night's darkness. The full moon illuminates the city's skyscrapers, oblivious to the conspiracies being forged. Isabel types rapidly on his laptop, his gold ring shining under the screen's light. He smiles confidently. Does he believe this will be enough to prevent any trouble? On the screen, a new official notice appears regarding Jokor, the employee of the early morning shift. Isabel's yellow eyes shine with predatory intensity. The imposing Kector Guild building stands in the middle of the modern city. Inside, the employees are already whispering about the news that has just been published. Two employees check the notice on their phones, unable to believe what they are reading. They wonder if that man in the black cape is the ghost everyone was talking about. They stand paralyzed, realizing that they now have such an entity as a coworker. They know the boss is not one to make jokes using official bulletins. The debate continues. It is obvious that the guy is not human, no matter how you look at it, but the notice explicitly orders them not to let it show and to behave normally. The group of employees falls silent, processing the strange situation. None of them sighs. He knows that if he starts investigating, his workload will only increase. He remains thoughtful, preferring to ignore the matter to avoid trouble. At least the company pays well for extra tasks, even if they would rather go home early. Two guards in the hallway comment that Jokor must be Schrodinger's human or something similar. They conclude that if the leader says it is safe, the best thing to do is follow the rules and not interfere. An employee stares ahead, trying to grasp that he will be working with a supernatural entity. His companions continue to argue, trying to make sense of what is happening. The two employees from before remain terrified, remembering that this portrait was under Yu Song-gun's charge. They walk away quickly down the hall. The man with the glasses watches them while thinking about inviting them to eat to calm them down. The blue sky stretches over the city buildings. Yu Song-gun smiles as he checks his phone. It seems the employees have reacted as he expected. Isabel laughs out loud at how wonderfully indifferent his subordinates are. He knows they hate extra work more than death, and that ensures they won't disrespect Jokor. Yu Song-gun remains serious, thinking about how to avoid problems when Jokor is exposed to civilians. He proposes that they must prepare everything so that the public sees Jokor as an S-class hunter. Isabel remains thoughtful, analyzing the impact of presenting an S-class hunter out of nowhere. In these times, hunters are public figures and national pride for them is very strong. Yu Song-gun believes that if they reduce Jokor's story to a human level, his safety will increase. He shows a diagram where the scale of danger changes according to the background assigned to the individual. Isabel finds the idea fascinating. If Yu Song-gun says so, it must be true. He ends up accepting the plan and promises that he will handle any collateral damage himself. Yu Song-gun reflects on Jokor's destructive potential while waiting for the elevator. He only hopes that the guild leader's plans do not end in an unnecessary massacre. Inside the elevator, Yu Song-gun's nerves betray him. He can only pray that Jokor behaves like a gentleman. His footsteps echo in the hall as he approaches the room where the young man awaits. Jokor stands in the grand hall, wrapped in his heavy black cape and an unsettling calm. Yu Song-gun stops dead upon seeing him, feeling a drastic change in the atmosphere. He is left speechless upon noticing that Jokor's presence emits a completely different vibration. Jokor turns toward him with renewed elegance and softly asks if he has kept him waiting. Yu Song-gun breaks into a cold sweat. Jokor's tone of voice has changed, becoming more refined and serene. The overwhelming pressure of his rank has disappeared, replaced by a courtesy that borders on the unreal. Jokor confesses that he has taken certain measures, so that his appearance does not result in alarm for others. Yu Song-gun is perplexed, not fully understanding what kind of measure he is referring to. Jokor explains that he has been adjusting his own nature to fit better into this world. It has been 2 days since his synchronization with Giovanni began, and the effects are evident. A honey bird flutters around him as he tries to assimilate this new state of consciousness. He remembers the instructions on how to obtain an adapter's consent to fully integrate. The vision of Giovanni, with his white tunic and noble bearing, becomes increasingly sharp in his mind. Jokor notes that the assimilation process is much more fluid when he adopts Giovanni's personality. The system informs him that his assimilation rate with the spirit of Giovanni Nibetland has reached 4%. Little by little, Jokor begins to experience memories and emotions that were never his. He feels the warmth and affection that Giovanni professed for the people under his care. He discovers a generous-hearted man who desired peace above all things. Even the most everyday objects like gardening tools take on new meaning for him. He learns to value simple pleasures like the taste of hot soup at the end of the day. Daily life with his loved ones was what Giovanni appreciated most in his world. The image of Giovanni Nibetland, radiant and serene, settles into Jokor's subconscious. Jokor walks through the halls, feeling that alien personality emerge from time to time. The system suggests he take advantage of this change to interact better with the humans of this time, but the assimilation brings with it physical needs that Jokor previously ignored completely. And he feels a voracious hunger that forces him to constantly seek food. His body also demands regular hours of sleep to continue functioning. He even ends up taking care of mundane tasks like thoroughly cleaning the bathroom. Sitting at the table, Jokor admits that with all these weaknesses he feels much more human. Since his appetite is sated, he proposes to a stunned Yu Song-gun that it is time to depart. They both move through the building, Jokor walking with a confidence that intimidates Yu Song-gun. Yu Song-gun realizes that he has been completely underestimating Jokor's level of sacrifice. It terrifies him to think that Jokor has suppressed his own power just to avoid crushing the human psyche. Yu Song-gun, such a level of voluntary containment is almost equivalent to a spiritual mutilation. While waiting for the elevator, he remembers another worrying trait, Jokor's obsessive generosity. Jokor points out the guild's riches, awakening in Yu Song-gun the fear that someone might try to scam him. Without warning, Jokor approaches a security guard to offer him a gift out of nowhere. The employee freezes, not knowing what to do in the face of the young man's unexpected gesture of kindness. Yu Song-gun walks through the city, internally lamenting not having prepared for the humans who might try to provoke Jokor. The duo advances under the shadow of imposing skyscrapers in a metropolis that overflows with technology and modernity. Ikor observes the surroundings with astonishment, reflecting on the saying that even mountains change in 10 years. He notes that compared to his last outing, the current urban landscape is much more complex and full of distinctive details. The view is so incredible that Jokor starts to find it comical that he was so worried about his resolution problems. As they pass, other citizens and hunters cannot help but turn, attracted by the unusual presence of the two men. Hunters with exotic equipment and striking features populate the streets, creating an atmosphere that is vibrant and dangerous at the same time. Ikor realizes that, despite having tried to keep a low profile, he is still drawing too much attention from passers-by. Yu Song-gun, noticing the gazes, Yu Song-gun suggests that Jokor keep his hood up to avoid any unnecessary altercations, and they head toward an elevated train to reach their restaurant. Ikor is left marveling at what he considers a true prodigy of engineering, questioning with disbelief how civilization could have progressed so much in just 31 years. Upon arriving at the station, Yu Song-gun pulls out a gold card and hands it to Jokor with total naturalness to pay for the fare. He assures him that it has no credit limit and that he can buy whatever he wishes with it. Ikor receives the object nervously, feeling overwhelmed by his guide's immense generosity and purchasing power. Hailing Yu Song-gun's instructions, Jokor approaches the magnetic reader at the entrance to validate his pass. Once inside the train, Jokor notes with surprise that, despite it being public transport, there are very few passengers on board. Yu Song-gun hears Jokor's doubt with a serene expression before explaining the harsh reality of the current system. In total frankness, he clarifies that the reason for the empty carriage is simply the prohibitive cost of the service. Jokor reflects heavily on how capitalism has survived and become even more ruthless over the decades, sensing that the social gap has widened, with the rich thriving while the poor struggle for the basics. Yu Song-gun adds that since it is barely 8:30 in the morning, most people are already busy working. Upon hearing that everyone is working at such an early hour, Jokor is left speechless with astonishment at such a level of industriousness. Yu Song-gun comments that depending on the company, it is normal to start the workday at 7:00 a.m. Jokor reflects that to be a slave to capitalism again, he would almost prefer to live as a talking portrait. The train continues its course while the snowy landscape remains behind. Jung-gun suddenly asks if he still remembers the fish bread he gave him a little while ago. Jokor assures him that he does and that he will soon give him something as a token of appreciation. The mentor tells him it is not necessary as they pass in front of a colorful street food stall. He mentions that there is not only fish bread but also takoyaki, egg bread, and the classic oden. He asks if Jokor knows what oden is, but Jokor remains thoughtful, staring into the void. Yu Song-gun feels that at times the young man does not even see him as a common human being. With an intense gaze and his unlimited card in hand, Jokor makes it clear that he is dying to try that food. The guide warns that he will look for a stall, though he promises nothing because people complain that they ruin the urban aesthetic. The vendor at the stall looks exhausted. It is not a popular job in the city, especially with the obstacles for those from the provinces. Jokor notes that there is a very marked social separation between the citizens and those from the outskirts. Red monorail crosses the modern buildings of the capital under a gray sky. Yu Song-gun admits with some shame that this is the social climate that dominates the current world. An abstract image reinforces the idea of a turbulent society divided by invisible barriers. Jung shows his A-rank hunter license and begins to explain how citizens are classified. A detailed panel shows the ranks. Grade 1 is for elite hunters and people with respectable jobs. Residents of the city, even with modest incomes, usually belong to Grade 2, but people who live in the provinces automatically fall into Grade 3, in much less protected zones. And there are the poor who live on the city limits and do not even have administrative records. They are implicitly classified as Grade 4, living in precarious conditions among rubble. And the lowest step is Grade 5, criminals and red hunters who are not even treated as humans, and the law authorizes eliminating them on sight. Jokor listens carefully to this dark reality of the system, asking if there is really a logical reason behind such a ruthless division. Jung-gun points out that everything is based on the infrastructure needed to maintain defensive lines against monsters. In a world where dungeons can open in any corner, security is a luxury that is paid for dearly. They stop in front of a traditional restaurant. Jung-gun explains that some monsters settled on Earth after the catastrophe, and winged creatures patrol the skies above the skyscrapers while the snow continues to fall. It is the reason why there are defensive walls surrounding the main urban cores. They enter the traditional Korean restaurant, where they are greeted by an employee in an elegant hanbok. The mentor adds that modern buildings are built with materials extracted from monsters to withstand attacks. But since resources are finite in the provinces, death lurks as soon as one drops their guard for a second. The mate begins to cook on the table. Song-gun clarifies that he chose this place because they do not serve monster meat. Jokor is surprised to discover that there are people who feed on those dangerous creatures. He begins to eat and reflects on how much common sense has changed in just 30 years. Despite everything, he thinks that the bulgogi is still incredibly delicious in the middle of this dystopian world. The view from the window shows a city that mixes cutting-edge technology with the nostalgia of the past. Later, they stroll along the Cheonggi-Cheon stream. Jokor notes that the environment is warm despite the winter. Shungun explains that those in charge of the city use magic to maintain the surroundings as if it were a greenhouse. Jokor stops upon noticing a small white bird fluttering quietly near the water. It is a cotton puff bird, a harmless monster whose fiber is used to make medical bandages. Yu Songun explains that the monsters have changed to coexist with humans, moving away from total exclusion. The little birds seem to adore Jokor. Shungun suggests that the water is temperate and that he should try putting his feet in. Jokor observes the crystalline water, feeling attracted by its purity. Carefully, he submerges a foot into the water, causing ripples on the surface. The aroma of the water is different. It is not odorless like in the past. It has something special. Yu Songun observes him in silence while Jokor comments that the water is beautiful, clear, and deep. Suddenly, the environment changes. Songun notices a strange, sweet aroma emanating from the water. He wonders if Jokor feels the same, for the water now reminds him of the sea from that other place. Jokor, with his now long golden hair, wonders why this sight smells like the sea. Yu Songun looks at him with eyes wide as saucers, sweating cold at his companion's sudden change. Jokor puts both hands into the water, which begins to glow with an intense blue energy. Songun shouts his name, alarmed. An enigmatic smile is drawn on Jokor's face while he plays with the magical water. Songun is left petrified behind him, unable to process what he is seeing. He asks him directly if he truly wishes to be Jokor, searching for any shred of humanity. Jokor maintains the smile while the mentor interrogates him with his gaze. With divine confidence, he simply responds that his name is Jokor, setting aside the human surname. Yu Songun is completely overwhelmed by the situation. Fear is reflected on his face. Later at the hotel, he hands him the room card and tells him that he will be right next door if he needs anything. He says goodbye with a forced smile, wishing him a good rest. As soon as he closes the door, Songun collapses in the hallway, trembling from what he just witnessed. In his mind, a single idea repeats. What I saw out there was not a human being. He remembers the portrait of Jokor and how he introduced himself as Jokor at the beginning, perhaps to better fit into Korea. After seeing that radical change, Songun asked him on purpose if he was Jokor, seeking to confirm his suspicions. The answer was clear. He defined himself only as Jokor, distancing himself from his human identity. Leaning against the hallway wall, the mentor tries to catch his breath after the trauma. He curses himself for having let his guard down when he saw that his rank had dropped. He knows that no matter how much he dresses like a human, he will never be one of them. It was like seeing nature itself taking human form, an unstoppable and alien force. Sitting in his bed, he lies face down, exhausted and terrified by the entity he has in the next room. Meanwhile, on the 45th floor, Jokor contemplates views of the city from the large window. He holds the little honey bird in his hands, lamenting not being able to feed it because he brought it secretly. He lies down on the bed and tells his little creation that upon returning, they will do whatever they want with the leftover fruit syrup. In the next room, Songun keeps staring at the ceiling, thinking that despite everything, he seems to be trying to imitate a human. He looks at his watch nervously, praying that this trip ends soon and without further incidents, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. As soon as he said those words, Jokor reacted to the water again. Jokor leaps toward the canal water in his golden form, leaving a trail of energy in his wake. Shongun, now in a boat, shouts Jokor's name while the driver is stunned by the scene. Jokor grabs the edge of the boat while it cuts through the canal at full speed. The guide approaches him and tells him to stop, that he is scaring the poor boat driver. The captain is trembling with fear while Jokor, with his mane in the wind, tries to apologize for his curiosity. Shun is furious and reprimands him, saying he cannot just go jumping out of the boat like that no matter how much the place smells like the sea. Finally, the mentor sighs with relief, seeing that nothing serious happened. He thanks Jokor for understanding, though Yu Songun remains pensive, his eyes weary as he processes the chaos of this outing. He continues his explanation of the city, noting that the water levels rose due to aquatic monsters, which forced them to open channels so the seawater could flow freely. He then asks Jokor if he likes the sea, reflecting on how the same thing happened in Cheonggyecheon. He begins to suspect that Jokor has a special affinity for the scent of the ocean. Jokor, back in his human form under the hood, seems to hesitate for a moment. I'm not sure, he begins, but then adds something curious. He thinks that Giovanni really does like it. See the tips of Jokor's golden locks peeking out. It is clear that the spirit within him has tastes of its own. And he wears a baffled expression. That yes, but no answer leaves him completely lost. As they approach a giant structure shaped like a conch shell, Jokor asks with curiosity if sirens exist in this world as well. Shungun is left thoughtful, repeating the word sirens to himself. The mention of them seems very specific. The mentor knows that such monsters appear occasionally, but there are also beings that simply adopt that form without being necessarily evil. There are creatures that are objects of worship, legends, and myths that come to life. These entities feed on people's faith and manifest as real monsters that walk the earth. Jokor listens attentively, maintaining that mysterious, serene air that characterizes him. Shun explains that the planet is now like a giant game board, a huge dungeon with its own rules. Suddenly, a mission window appears for Jokor to meet with the sun god and bring closure to the Little Mermaid's story. The boat finally arrives at its destination. The restaurant is impressive, built upon the remains of what used to be a fixed dungeon. Its exterior is truly striking. And seated at the table, Jokor returns to his long-haired golden form and asks what exactly a fixed dungeon is. Shongun is surprised he doesn't know, so he takes the opportunity to give him a quick lesson. Dungeons are divided into fixed and mobile. The latter can be villa type or entry type. The virtual ones are the most dangerous because they have no physical limits and trap anyone who accidentally triggers certain conditions, like being in a store at 9 p.m. Vikor frowns, finding it incredibly unfair that someone could be dragged into a dungeon just for buying something. Shungun agrees. It is one of society's biggest concerns due to the damage they cause. Jokor comments that humans have worries of an enormous scale. Turning to fixed dungeons, Songun explains that these create new terrain. The place where they are now emerged from a dungeon related to cooking. It tells the story of a civilian chef who wasn't a hunter but ended up trapped and had to cook for the dungeon boss. The chef managed to move the master of the place with his food and completed the mission with a perfect score, thus ending the raid. Vikor is visibly moved by the tale. Shungun adds that after that, the chef awakened his class, and today at 92 years old, he is still active. Jokor is stunned to hear the age. Shungun explains that awakened individuals of class A and above age much slower. The protagonist is terrified by the idea of having to keep working at 90. He says this changed world never stops giving him shocks. Shungun continues, a villa dungeon is when terrain from another dimension stays permanently on Earth, even after the rules disappear. Finally, there are the entry-type ones, which are portals to other dimensions. Vikor says he's got it all now, comparing it to a video game. The mentor smiles and asks how he liked the food, hoping for a good review. Vikor, with a radiant smile and his golden hair shining, replies that it has been excellent. He says it reminded him of the dinners he used to have with his disciples. Songun is glad Jokor enjoyed it, though he can't help but feel somewhat uncomfortable. As they eat, Songun thinks to himself that if Jokor wants to pass for human, he should dampen his aura a bit more. Customers at nearby tables are breaking into a cold sweat, intimidated by the immense power emanating from the golden-haired youth. Songun tries to relax the atmosphere by saying that humans are more social than they seem, all while thinking about getting out of there as fast as possible. He suggests going to the Gyeongbokgung Palace. Jokor is intrigued by the name and agrees to the proposal. Jun recalls with nostalgia taking his students on field trips there, wondering if those children are okay in this chaotic world. Jokor assures him that he is looking forward to seeing it. Under his hood, his eyes glow with a mix of curiosity and determination. Night falls over Seoul, and the city lights mix with traditional lanterns floating in the air. The palace looks spectacular under the moonlight with tables set to receive visitors. Songun appears wearing an elegant blue and white hanbok. Jokor in his black hanbok and traditional hat, he tells him he looks wonderful. The waitresses whisper as they pass by, impressed by his bearing. Vikor simply says thanks, ready to continue his tour. Shun walks thoughtfully through the palace, confessing that although he always came here to accompany his students, he had never put on a hanbok himself. It had been hard to calm the bored children, but in the end, it was worth seeing them dressed up, taking photos for memories. The place, which before was so serious and rigid, has now transformed into something worth seeing, full of life and magic. As they walk through the royal grounds, strange, ethereal, luminous figures float around them, giving the palace a dreamlike air. Vikor stops for a moment and calls out to his mentor. Mr. Yu Songun, he says in a soft voice, looking upward. The young man points to the glowing creatures fluttering over the roofs. What are those beings called? He asks with genuine curiosity. Songun stops and looks at him with a half smile. He confesses he thought Jokor would already know what kind of beings they were. He explains that they are fairy tales or living stories. He says that the children of the root do not usually appear in tourist places very often, so it is lucky to see them. Vikor remembers he had heard something similar before. He keeps staring at one of the figures, processing the information. I take advantage of the stop to buy some Korean-style hot dogs. Jokor asks Songun to explain in more detail what the children of the root are. Jun resumes his explanation. The root is what he mentioned when introducing the gardeners. It is difficult to define, but basically, it is like a god of gods. It is a system that manages the balance of the entire universe in every dimension, creating rules so everything functions. The beings born from that source are its children. Among all those beings, these little figures they see now are what they call fairy tales. Fragments of stories that have come to life thanks to that universal system. Yu Songun explains to Jokor that the children of the root seem human, but deep down, they do not think like us, nor do they have the same mind. He says they are basically nature trying to imitate a concept or an idea. For that reason, nobody really knows what their true essence is on the inside. Jokor asks if others can see them, and Songun confirms it is a very rare gift. It tells him that before, it was almost impossible to see such beings walking around, but since the root influenced the earth and the dungeons appeared, the entire ecosystem changed, and now there are more people with special abilities. Sean gets a bit cocky and says he is one of the few talented ones who can see them without problems. He even mentions that he awakened his powers through a portrait, feeling very proud of his past. Jokor just listens in silence as he finishes his drink. He feels a bit bad because it seems Songun is treating him like a monster again. Suddenly, Songun notices something strange and hears there is a fight near the palace. In the distance, there is some commotion among the crowd. Jun dismisses it, saying it is just a small altercation and the guards will handle it quickly. Right there, Jokor's system gives him a mission. Create a frame to check how dangerous the environment is. Jokor watches a man with glasses who is standing nearby, watching everything very calmly. While the guards drag a guy away, Jokor cannot take his eyes off the man in white. Jokor raises his hands and forms a frame with his fingers to analyze the subject. The result leaves him frozen. The system marks a 5-star danger level. It is a total total threat. Yokor begins to break out in a cold sweat, thinking, how is it possible that someone so dangerous is walking around like it's nothing? And the man with the glasses feels Yokor's intense gaze and turns toward him immediately. Yokor realizes he was discovered for staring too much and gets nervous. To distract Songgun so he doesn't notice the danger, Yokor makes Joni, his little glowing honeybird, appear. Songgun sees the golden light and realizes right away that Yokor is up to something. Even though Yokor tries to hide it, his mentor knows perfectly well that he just summoned a creature. Shin asks if it is the same water bird from before, but Yokor clarifies that this one is Joni. Nentor resigns himself with a look of exhaustion, already imagining the absurd report he will have to submit regarding the night's events. Meanwhile, the priest from the Sun Cult watches them go with a deeply somber expression. He stands perfectly still, tracking Yokor and Yusongun as they retreat down the palace path. Yokor, however, still feels that heavy, piercing gaze on his back and is far from calm. He urges Songgun to leave immediately before that man decides to approach and cause trouble. Yokor insists on returning to the hotel, desperately wanting to distance himself from the tense atmosphere, but before they leave, he demands they buy 3 cups of tiakbaki. His hunger knows no bounds. As they depart, the priest walks down a lonely, shadowed alleyway, obsessed with what just transpired. He cannot shake the image of the white-haired boy who analyzed him a moment ago. He continues through the darkness, recalling the deeply unsettling sensation that the youth's gaze gave him. He realizes that Yokor used a highly advanced ability to see through him via that invisible frame. He remembers that the boy was accompanied by Yu Song-gun, a well-known hunter. He becomes enraged, realizing that Yokor is an awakened individual who was actually able to read his information. He felt his personal secrets exposed for a split second, and the realization sends him into a state of paranoia. And he mutters that the Sun Cult ceremony is fast approaching and there can be no mistakes. He has worked too hard as a priest to prepare this grand plan. Hildy decides that if the boy suspects anything or speaks of what he saw, he will have no choice but to kill him. The priest is still moving through the dark alley when he hears a strange sound coming from above. He stops dead in his tracks and looks toward a ledge, wondering what kind of bird that is. He has never seen such a creature before. Upon seeing Joni perched there, the priest wonders if the creature belongs to the boy he saw earlier, and if perhaps he is a tamer. He lets out a sinister laugh, assuming the boy sent the little bird just to spy on him. He thinks it is a classic rookie mistake and prepares to snatch the creature to track down its owner, throwing his hand out, wrapped in dark energy, confident that capturing it will be a piece of cake. Things do not go as he expected. The moment he touches Joni, the little bird begins to bubble and glow with a strange intensity between his fingers. The priest is left in total shock as he senses a compressed divine energy beginning to overflow violently. He doesn't even have time to understand what is happening before the situation spirals completely out of control. With a sharp, dry burst, the creature reacts to the aggression, leaving the priest paralyzed and covered in splatters of red magical paint. The scene shifts to a hotel room where everything is in complete silence under the moonlight. Yokor wakes up with a start, feeling a sharp pang in the connection he shares with his creation. The first thing he whispers is the name of his little bird. He remains sitting on the edge of the bed, processing the loss amidst the solitude of his luxury room. He realizes with profound sadness that Joni has disappeared, and a sense of deep exhaustion washes over him. In the very depths of his soul, Yokor just asks to be allowed to live in peace for once. He feels that if the pressure continues like this, he is going to end up breaking down completely, mourning everything he has lost.
The scene shifted to the roadside candy shop where the shopkeeper revealed that he had been seeing strange beings ever since he was a child. A flashback showed his childhood where he pointed towards something only he could see. His friend insisted that no one was there, and assumed he had spotted a monster. The young boy looked carefully once again and realized it was not a monster. He quickly dismissed it as his imagination to avoid drawing attention. However, the truth was different. A shadow-like figure was clearly standing nearby, proving that his eyes had not deceived him. The shopkeeper explained that these beings sometimes took on human-like appearances. Even though they looked familiar, he always knew they were completely different from animals and plants. He also revealed that truly dangerous creatures appeared from time to time. On many occasions, he had even seen monsters wandering around ordinary people. Although he never understood exactly how they caused people's deaths, he never sensed any malice from them. Even so, their existence alone was enough to threaten human lives, since they normally caused no harm. Unless disturbed, he had chosen to spend his entire life pretending that he could not see them. Back in the present, Yokor arrived at the shop with his pet bird, Honey, to buy some food. As Honey looked around and asked about the price of a bag, the shopkeeper froze in complete shock. At that moment, he recalled that Cheyenne Hyuk was the older brother supporting his younger sister Cha, an F-rank hunter, and his youngest sister Cha Easel, who had awakened as a priest. Despite being only a third-ass citizen, he carried the burden of supporting his entire family. The shopkeeper immediately realized that the moment had finally come when avoiding these mysterious beings was no longer possible. Honey had spoken like a real person, and its behavior was so perfectly human that it completely shattered everything he believed possible. The shopkeeper nervously revealed that a bag of 10 bonang cost 5,000,001. Yokor then asked if card payments were accepted. The shopkeeper hesitated and admitted that he preferred cash but also accepted cards. After hearing that, Yokor took out his card and requested one bag. The moment the shopkeeper saw the card, fear filled his mind. He wondered if refusing the sale would cost him his life. Trying to stay calm, he explained that he had just sold the last batch and needed time to prepare a fresh one. Yokor calmly agreed and decided to wait. As the shopkeeper prepared the order, he noticed that even the card appeared completely legitimate. He briefly wondered if it had been stolen, but quickly dismissed the thought because he could not imagine why a monster would need something like that. Looking at Yokor and the mysterious bird beside him, he considered the possibility that Yokor might be a bird tamer. Even so, both of them carried the same unsettling presence as the strange beings he had seen throughout his life. Among them, Honey felt especially terrifying. Despite its harmless appearance, the shopkeeper believed that innocent look was nothing more than a perfect disguise. Once the fresh batch was ready, the shopkeeper handed over the bag of bungopang. Jokor thanked him for the food. Before leaving, Jokor handed him a shining crystal as a gift. The unexpected gesture left the shopkeeper completely stunned. Jokor explained that he had interrupted the shopkeeper's work and forced him to prepare everything again, so he wanted the crystal to serve as both an apology and a token of gratitude. The shopkeeper insisted that such a gift was unnecessary. However, Jokor quietly left the crystal behind and walked away. The shopkeeper watched Jokor leave, and finally let out a deep sigh of relief, convinced that he had somehow survived the most terrifying encounter of his life. Ever since he was a child, he had been able to see strange beings that ordinary people could not. Because of that, he had always believed that one day he would meet a bizarre and unexplainable death. At the very least, he expected to die in some mysterious way, and after meeting Yokor, he was certain that day had finally arrived. Just as he began to calm down, he suddenly sensed another enormous monster approaching. Fear instantly returned. But when he looked closely, he realized it was only Yokor's pet bird, Honey. To his complete disbelief, Honey quietly picked up the shining crystal that Yokor had left behind as a gift, and flew away with it as if it had come back specifically for that purpose. That single incident frightened the poor shopkeeper so badly that he decided he could no longer stay there. He resolved to move his stall to a completely different location the very next day, hoping he would never cross paths with Yokor again. Unfortunately, his luck turned out to be unbelievably terrible. Early the next morning, while he was running his stall at the new location, arrived with Yokor to buy some food. The moment Shungdan saw him, he immediately recognized the vendor from the Collector Guild building and casually ordered a bag of bunjapang. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper froze on the spot. He was completely stunned and mentally traumatized, wondering how the world different location the very next day, hoping he would never cross paths with Yokor again. Wondering how the world could possibly be so small, noticed that the vendor had disappeared from his old spot, and assumed he had simply moved to a new location. Trying his best to stay calm, the shopkeeper explained that he could not remain in the same place for too long because the inspectors would eventually catch him. As he spoke, he noticed that Yokor was standing beside someone who looked like a first-class hunter. That observation made him even more convinced that Yokor himself was also a hunter. Unable to suppress his curiosity any longer, the shopkeeper cautiously asked if Yokor was a temeri hunter. Before the conversation could continue, Yokor thanked the shopkeeper once again for everything that had happened the previous day. Those words immediately caught attention. Surprised, he asked what had happened yesterday. Yokor calmly explained that Honey had wandered off, so he had gone out to search for his pet bird. Completely unaware of the terrifying misunderstanding the poor shopkeeper had gone through, Seung immediately reminded Yokor that he should always inform him before going anywhere alone. Yokor calmly explained that he had found Honey almost immediately. However, Seongdan pointed out that finding the bird quickly was never the real issue. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper became so emotional that tears of relief almost filled his eyes. He finally convinced himself that his suspicions had been correct. In his mind, Yokor was clearly a dangerous existence, who needed to be kept under the control of a first-class hunter. Looking back at the previous day, he Yokor that he should always inform him before going anywhere alone. Yokor calmly explained that he had found Honey almost immediately. However, Seongdan pointed out that finding the bird quickly was never the real issue. Looking back at the previous day, he realized he had nearly lost his life simply by selling a bag of banjopang. Seongdan then confirmed that Yokor was indeed a tamer hunter and politely asked if something unusual had happened. The shopkeeper immediately explained everything. After Jokor bought the bunang, the bird called Honey had suddenly grown to an enormous size before biting his head twice and flying away. Jokor was completely shocked after hearing the story. Seung then asked Jokor what he thought about the situation. Without making any excuses, Jokor sincerely apologized and asked whether the shopkeeper had been injured. Still nervous, the shopkeeper admitted that it had not really hurt and had felt more like a strange prank than an actual attack. Even so, Jokor apologized once again and awkwardly explained that his son could be childish at times. Those words completely confused. He could not understand why Jokor had just referred to a bird as his son. A moment later, Jokor removed the cloak covering his head and revealed his second appearance, the blonde-haired Jokorvani. With a gentle smile, Jokorvani politely asked the shopkeeper for permission to examine him for any injuries. He explained that he was a doctor and knew how to properly inspect wounds. Seunggan was left speechless once again. He knew Jokor possessed the memories of a 29-year-old human named Se Jokor, but he had never imagined that the man had actually been a doctor. Jokorvani continued smiling politely at the frightened shopkeeper, leaving the poor man completely stunned by the unexpected kindness. Meanwhile, the scene shifted elsewhere, where a mysterious woman with a bizarre creature-like appearance searched the area for someone. As she followed the trail, she suddenly realized it ended there. She wondered if the one she had deliberately chosen had already been defeated. The female stepped forward and said, "Even the Temple of the Sun and the media have no idea how this priest vanished. There isn't a single trace of a fight, or even any sign that he escaped. We were planning to sabotage the Sun Festival, but the very priest we needed to sabotage disappeared. I'll need you to step up." As she finished speaking, another little demon appeared beside the group. Filled with determination and anger, she immediately declared, "I won't disappoint you." The female simply smiled and replied, "Don't be so tense. We're all just here to have a good time together." Even while saying those carefree words, an overwhelming aura of anger and dark energy continued to radiate from her. Then, without any warning, the entire group suddenly vanished, as if they had never been there. The scene then shifted back to the shopkeeper, who rubbed his head in confusion and muttered, "My head feels warm," Jokor calmly explained. "Your scalp had a small scratch, so I purified it just in case you caught some kind of disease." Hearing those words, the shopkeeper instinctively touched the top of his head. "Purified?" he repeated in disbelief. Meanwhile, Songgun stared at Jokor with shock and anger written all over his face. He can even use holy magic? How? He wondered. At the same time, a hint of fear crept into his mind, as another thought crossed his head. Will the day ever come when I finally learn Gio's true identity? The shopkeeper looked at Jokor with a completely different expression now. "So you were a believer?" "I got the wrong idea because beast tamers usually don't worship a god. He was such a high-ranking hunter that I mistook him for a monster. I've never heard of a monster using holy magic. If he's skilled enough to perform purification rituals all by himself, then he must be an incredibly devoted believer, so why isn't he a priest?" The thought continued to linger in his mind as memories of his own childhood briefly surfaced. Looking back at the fish in front of him, he asked, "Since you're such a devoted believer, will you all be coming to watch the Sun Cult initiation this time?" Songgun looked toward him and asked, "Oh, is it already time for the initiation at the Temple of the Sun?" The shopkeeper nodded and replied, "Yes, they usually hold the initiation in the middle of winter." As the shopkeeper finished packing the items, he handed them over and said, "Actually, my youngest sibling awakened as a priest, so he'll be taking part in this initiation. Seeing a fellow believer reminded me of him, and for a moment, it made me really happy." Hearing that, Sunggun replied, "I heard it's easier to receive God's gaze when more people gather." The shopkeeper nodded in agreement. "That's right. I'm a little worried about how my youngest will make a living if he isn't chosen by a god during the initiation." Sunggun listened carefully before reassuring him. If he awakened as a priest, then his affinity for holy magic must be exceptional. He should at least be able to get a desk job at the temple. The shopkeeper smiled faintly as he finished handing over the packed goods. "I hope so. They say it's going to be a huge event this time, so you should come and watch." Seunggun accepted the package with a smile and replied, "We will. Please stop by the collector's building again." Just as they were about to leave, the shopkeeper suddenly turned back and asked, "Are you sure nothing really happened at dawn?" Before Seunggun could answer, Jokor calmly spoke up. "Honey says he is innocent." Seunggun fell silent for a moment. "I don't know whether the innocence spoken of by a being of origin is the same as a human's." Before he could finish that thought, he changed the subject and asked, "Are you planning to return to the portrait today?" Yokor looked around at the lively streets before answering, "There are so many people outside, it's fun, and there's so much to see and experience. But I don't think this is where I belong. For a fragile and harmless portrait to survive in this world has become far too harsh." After hearing those words, Songgun looked up at him with a gentle expression and said, "You're right. It must be difficult for Gio, who's kind and sensitive to both good and evil, to come out here when he has to sacrifice his own essence just to do it." As they continued walking down the road together, Songgun smiled slightly before asking, "But I'm glad you had fun. Are you planning to watch the initiation?" Jokor nodded and replied, "Yes, I am curious." Songgun smiled and said, "I'll let you know when it starts, so rest inside the portrait until then." With that, the scene shifted back to the portrait once again. After a short sightseeing trip through the outside world, Gio returned to the portrait, and spent an entire day sleeping. Lying comfortably on his bed with a blanket wrapped around him, Jokor quietly muttered to himself, "It's dangerous outside the blanket." At that moment, a system message appeared before him. Assimilation rate, 14.8%. Seeing the notification, Yokor gently picked up honey in his hands and began organizing his thoughts. "As far as I know, I should still be synchronizing with Giovanni. The sensation is much weaker inside the portrait than it was outside, and the synchronization has slowed compared to when I came into contact with water outside. This must be one of the portrait world's unique traits. I never noticed it while staying inside the portrait, but after going outside, I can clearly feel the difference. Even though I'm still synchronizing while inside the portrait, is it because I'm treated as a painting instead of a human?" He continued thinking about the strange phenomenon, trying to understand why the portrait world affected his synchronization in such a different way. After thinking everything through, Yokor suddenly got up with renewed confidence and declared, "I'm amazing, just as expected. Shall we go see the old man? Let's pack plenty of sandwiches." At that moment, two quest windows appeared before him. Giovanni's quests. Communicate with the sun god, 0/1. Give the Little Mermaid an ending, 0/1. Without wasting any time, Yokor began gathering food. One after another, numerous lunchboxes were stacked in front of him, and before long he had prepared even more boxes to take along for the journey. Once everything was ready, he transformed back into his golden-haired form and immediately entered the same portrait once again. As soon as he arrived, nothing could be seen in any direction except the endless ocean stretching as far as the eye could see. Looking around, Yokor spoke apologetically. Yes, this priest is very late, please understand, I went out to see the outside world for a little while. As he finished speaking, he moved swiftly through the water, his body cutting through the sea with incredible speed. In the distance, a beautiful glowing light illuminated the depths, making the underwater world appear almost dreamlike. While swimming, Yokor quietly reflected on his strange condition. Even though I'm clearly underwater, I can still breathe. Is it because I'm already dead in this world, or because my essence is still that of a portrait even after I've synchronized? It feels like I'm not bound by this world's rules, just like when I was in that painted forest. Is that so? That's a shame. Should I say it feels like I've lost my hometown? Even as those thoughts lingered in his mind, he carefully used the sun's miracle to surround every lunchbox with protective bubbles of air. That's right, he said to himself. The food shouldn't get wet. Finally arriving before the old man, Yokor respectfully presented the meal and said, Please enjoy your meal, father. The moment he finished speaking, another system window appeared before him. Communicate with the sun god, completed. The scene then shifted away from the underwater world and moved to the guild headquarters. There, the guild leader could be seen clapping his hands before speaking in surprise. You're saying Yokor seems to have another personality? Sitting across from him, Sungun held his forehead in frustration and replied, I told you I'd organize a report and submit it soon, but you insisted on calling me here? Songun grabbed his head in frustration and said that it wasn't as if he was only responsible for Gio's portrait. Lately the sea had been incredibly noisy, so he kept getting called over there again and again. Hearing that, the guild leader looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked, The sea? After that, it was revealed that the movements of the children of the origin near the sea had been acting strangely lately. Songun explained that something could happen out at sea very soon. Hearing that, the guild leader simply smiled and replied, That has nothing to do with me. Songun slowly closed his eyes before calmly responding, I figured you'd say that. The guild leader kept smiling and continued, Isn't it obvious? A mysterious being of origin returned completely unharmed without a single major incident. He even came back with a completely different personality, didn't he? After hearing something like that, how could you expect me to sit around waiting for a report? It's not like I can just talk to the portrait either. Without wasting a second, Songun immediately answered, That's exactly why Jokor avoids talking to you. The scene then shifted to Jokor. Looking around at the flooded surroundings, he said, Since everything is underwater, fishing has become pretty difficult. I wanted to treat you to some fried fish for dinner, but I'm one of the few people in this world who can't swim, so I can't catch any myself. At that moment, a large amount of brilliant golden energy surrounded him, creating a mysterious atmosphere. At the same time, little honey slowly began floating upward. Seeing this, someone asked in surprise, Are you talking about honey? He can hunt? Meanwhile, on the other side, Songun continued explaining the situation to the guild leader. This is only my guess as a curator, but ever since Jokor lowered his status to come out sightseeing, he has seemed like a completely different being from the one we usually knew. Hearing those words, the guild leader looked genuinely surprised and asked, He lowered his own status all the way down to the level of a human? Songun nodded and replied, Yes, surprising isn't it? However, the guild leader frowned and answered, Rather than surprising, it's disgusting. To casually carve away his own flesh like that, Songun then asked, Were there any health issues? After thinking for a moment he explained, The longer he stayed outside, the more exhausted he seemed, but other than that, I didn't notice any major problems. Songun continued his explanation, It's just, wasn't the usual Jokor a bit more arrogant? Well, not exactly arrogant. He was unbelievably polite, yet at the same time he carried an overwhelming presence. Even while introducing himself as nothing more than an ordinary 29-year-old human, he naturally gave off the feeling of someone standing far above everyone else. Whenever he handed out snacks or precious jewels as rewards, it never felt like a simple gift. Instead, it felt exactly like a supreme being rewarding his subordinates. But the Jokor who lowered his own status didn't give off that feeling at all. He genuinely seemed like an ordinary human. Songun paused for a moment before continuing, and when he came into contact with the water, he wasn't even the 29-year-old young man So Jokor that he claimed to be. His entire form changed, and he used holy magic as naturally as if it were simply a part of his breathing. At that moment, I felt as though his personality had completely changed, and yet he still introduced himself as Jokor. The scene then shifted back to Jokor. Honey slowly approached him, and after looking at the little creature, Jokor smiled warmly before saying, You can catch them, but you want me to keep my eyes closed? Why, honey? Dad can love you no matter what you look like. I knew how incredible your potential was from the very moment they told me that you bit that bungopang vendor. As soon as Joker gently reached out and touched Honey, a brilliant surge of energy began radiating around the little creature. Watching Honey's reaction, Joker slowly turned around with a cheerful smile and continued. You really don't want to show me? How adorable. Look, Father Sun God, my grandson is so cute. Okay, this dad is really curious about what you look like, but if keeping my eyes closed makes you feel more comfortable, then I can keep them closed for as long as you want. Just call me when you're done catching them. As he said those words, Joker placed one of his hands over his eyes, making sure he couldn't see anything at all. At that very moment, the same mysterious beast that had previously been seen near the shopkeeper appeared once again. Even that creature looked completely shocked by what it was witnessing and silently fixed its gaze on Joker. Meanwhile, on the other side, Sunggun continued speaking, his attention returning to Joker's portrait as the conversation carried on. Sunggun continued explaining. That name wasn't given by a human. It's a name that we can only see because it has been defined by the origin itself. Every skill used by the awakened ones, hunters, is supported by the origin. That means the name Joker is the name that the system itself assigned to the portrait. It isn't a name that a mere human can change or ignore, and the fact that we can't read anything beyond that means the origin deliberately blocked the information, declaring, this must not be read. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to Joker. He was still watching little Honey, who had stuffed its tiny mouth full of fish after successfully catching them. Seeing that adorable sight, Joker smiled with obvious relief and said, this is incredibly reassuring. The scene then returned to the guild leader, who thoughtfully replied, it almost sounds like the story of a god. What if Joker is actually a god, something that no mere human can truly define? At almost the same moment, the scene switched back to Joker once again. Looking toward his companion, he warmly asked, Father, then shall we enjoy the fish together at the cabin for dinner? Meanwhile, Sungden continued his explanation without hesitation. No matter what Gio's true identity may be, didn't I already tell you that giving a living story a setting like that is dangerous in itself? It's the kind of existence that could become a disaster through belief alone. After hearing that, the guild leader calmly responded, it's only speculation. Still, Joker's existence is clearly not normal, is it? Sungden gave a quiet nod before revealing his decision. That's exactly why I intend to approach the changed Joker even more carefully. Even though Gio genuinely believes himself to be human, he doesn't show the slightest concern about just how far removed from humanity he really is. He's far too carefree for someone who possesses power capable of threatening all of humanity. Sungden spoke in a serious tone. I don't think a human could possibly possess that kind of capacity. If I carelessly ask about his different personalities. Before he could finish, the scene shifted to Joker. He was carefully cutting up the body of a fish while little Honey sat quietly beside him, patiently watching everything he was doing. Meanwhile, Sungden continued explaining his concern to the guild leader. And if he realizes his true identity and goes berserk, that would become a serious problem. At the same time, inside the painting, Joker happily finished preparing the meal and called out, Alright, the meal is ready, it tastes best while it's still hot. I even used the sun's miracle to make it extra crispy. He then began enjoying the freshly cooked food together with his teddy. After taking a bite, he smiled with satisfaction and said, maybe it's because it's so fresh, but it's delicious no matter how you cook it. A voice replied, sounds great, I just happened to grow a small garden, so shall we use that for our next meal? Back in the conversation, Sunggun looked toward the guild leader and asked, are you preparing a hunter license for Joker? The guild leader answered without hesitation, of course. For humanity's sake, he needs to remain human. And that bird, you said it was a being Gio created simply by drawing it, right? Sungden nodded and replied, ah, yes, he brought it out this time, but nothing really. Before he could finish, the guild leader interrupted him. No, that's not what I mean. If he can create food, jewels, and even living animals just by drawing them, then what would happen if he drew an entire landscape painting? The next morning, Joker woke up with his teddy still lying beside him. As he stepped outside the cabin, an unbelievable sight unfolded before his eyes. The small garden he remembered was gone. In its place stood an enormous tree covered with ripe apples, while fields of corn stretched out around it. Staring at the transformed scenery in complete disbelief, he exclaimed, what in the world is this? What happened to my precious little garden? Where did the cherry tomatoes, corn and peas go? And why does this place look like the Amazon? It's not like Mr. Yu Sung-woon gave me some strange seeds. Still confused, Joker slowly walked forward and pushed aside a thick cluster of leaves. The moment the leaves parted, he noticed fresh blood on the ground. His expression immediately changed as his eyes followed the trail, revealing the lifeless body of a magical deer lying motionless before him. Seeing the dead deer lying there, Joker speaks in a trembling voice, completely shocked by what he is seeing, and says, Gods of heaven and ear, why is there a dead deer here? Just then, we see a panel that gives us information about the deer. It is identified as a treehorn deer, and its alchemy method is described as follows. Butcher and sun dry the meat. It provides a strong sense of satiety and removes mild abrasions. Its habitat is listed as the ruined Abylis Rainforest Animal Kingdom. After reading all of this, Yokor begins wondering to himself, did it cross over from another dimension? When? But then, he suddenly notices something nearby and says, this sweet potato vine, boasting such vigorous vitality, must have slayed this invasive species from outside the canvas. Looking at everything happening around him, Yokor realizes in his mind that this place is far more dangerous than he had imagined. At that moment, his little bird, Honey, looks toward him. Hearing what Yokor says, Honey seems to respond, and Yokor looks at her and says, you're saying you could do this much too? No, this isn't a competition, Honey. He then thinks that the timing is actually perfect because he was just about to prepare a meal anyway. He casually adds, well, this is great timing, since I was just about to prepare a meal anyway. It so happens that I once learned butchery skills from a guy I know who lives in Majingdong. The scene then shifts, and we see Honey together with several water birds, all of them gathered around and eating something. After that, the scene shifts back to the protagonist. He is sitting peacefully at his table, eating the dumplings he has prepared, and as he enjoys his meal, he says, indeed, the system's advice to process it into jerky was crucial. There was more meat than expected, so I didn't have a good place to store it. Sitting beside him is his teddy bear, who listens to him and simply says, nice. Yokor continues enjoying his food in this peaceful atmosphere. Everything feels calm and comfortable, and after everything he has experienced, he looks completely satisfied with the simple life he is living. As he continues eating, Yokor says to himself, I want to live like this forever peacefully. With that, we see a peaceful scene of Rahat. He has already fallen asleep inside his small house with his little bird beside him. However, despite being tired, he suddenly thinks to himself, I can't fall asleep today. He gets up and walks into his painting room, where he looks around for a moment before saying, that's because I've gotten curious about the view outside the company. As he stands there, his thoughts continue, and he begins to wonder about the strange connection between his paintings and the real world. At first I thought I was drawing landscapes purely from my imagination, but as I completed the paintings, I could tell the landscapes and the places I imagine are relatively identical to reality. He starts connecting the pieces in his mind and realizes that if the landscapes he imagines are actually reflecting real places, then there is a possibility that he can discover what the world outside the company looks like simply by imagining it. He then thinks, then, if I imagine what it looks like outside the company right now, outside, it's probably a dark dawn. At the same time, the scene shifts to another man who is wandering through the cold streets. Looking completely lost and troubled, he wonders to himself, where am I supposed to leech off of next? The cold is becoming unbearable as he continues moving forward. He thinks about his current situation and says, even if I'm an awakener, an F rank can really only get treated as a porter at best. Now my leg is injured, leaving me like this. I even got kicked out of the team that used to employ me for a long time. His situation has become extremely difficult, and with no proper source of income, even basic necessities have started becoming a problem. Looking at his phone, he remembers another expense waiting for him, and says, I have to buy the youngest a priest robe too, and my rent went up this time. Things only continue getting worse. The buses have already stopped running, leaving him with nowhere to go, and with the temperature dropping, he is forced to consider sleeping outside. As he keeps walking through the freezing streets, snow begins falling around him, making the situation even more miserable. Frustrated by everything that has happened, he mutters, the buses stopped running, so I have to sleep on the street, and it's even freaking snowing, this sucks. Continuing down the road, Hunter thinks about the limited options he has left. I used my Hunter ID to buy a few days of city residency rights, but I don't have the cash to stay in a hotel. With his injured leg, rising expenses, no team to support him, and nowhere to stay for the night, Hunter continues walking through the snowy streets, trying to figure out what he is going to do next. As Hunter continues walking through the freezing streets, he thinks to himself, if I sleep on the street anywhere, in the worst case scenario, I might get demoted to a Tier 4 citizen, making it even harder to earn money. He looks around while trying to figure out where he can possibly spend the night and then wonders, isn't there a company nearby that makes good money? He knows that places like that usually have thermal magic cast all around them, so at least he might be able to find some warmth nearby. Just as he continues walking, he passes by a wall where he suddenly notices a portrait hanging on it. For a brief moment, he stops and looks at the painting. The portrait is actually of Jokor, although Hunter has no idea who the person in the painting is. After staring at it for a moment, he becomes startled and says, what kind of crazy bastard hung a painting here? Whoa, it scared me. He then quickly continues walking. However, only a short while later, Hunter's attention is drawn towards something ahead of him. He notices a person sitting in the freezing cold, looking extremely poor and helpless. Seeing the person sitting there, Hunter thinks to himself, are they a Tier 4 citizen? It seems like they're breathing. They've come pretty far out here. He looks at the person for a moment and suddenly says, damn. Without hesitating any further, Hunter takes off his muffler and gives it to the person sitting there. What Hunter does not realize is that the person sitting there is none other than Jokor himself. But for some reason, we are not told why Jokor is sitting there in the cold. Jokor is completely surprised by Hunter's unexpected gesture and simply stares at him in shock as the hunter quickly walks away. As Hunter runs off, he feels extremely embarrassed about what he just did, and thinks to himself, fuck, this is so embarrassing, fuck, why the hell are they sleeping so pathetically? The youngest knitted this for me. After running quite a distance, the hunter finally slows down and stops. As he catches his breath, he suddenly looks to the side, and notices the same portrait he had seen earlier. However, the painting now seems to be in a much worse condition. Seeing it again, he starts thinking to himself, is that the painting I saw in the other alley earlier? What? Did I miss it before? No, I definitely saw the exact same thing, unless the same painting is hung up in multiple places. He carefully observes everything around him, still unable to understand what is happening, and continues thinking, what on earth is that? What is going to happen to me in this place? Just then, Jokor speaks from inside the portrait and simply says, excuse me. The moment the hunter hears those words, he breaks into a cold sweat. For a brief instant, it is as if all the strength leaves his body and his entire soul freezes in fear. He immediately collapses to the ground. After some time, we see the hunter finally regain consciousness and get back up. Still completely shaken by what just happened, he shouts, what was that just now? Was I about to die? What did I just see? As he looks down, he suddenly notices that there is a strange stone in his hand. At that moment, a panel explains what happened. The F-rank hunter instinctively realized this unidentified gem was a gift given by the portrait. Meanwhile, inside the portrait, Jokor is walking around while trying to understand the situation himself. He says, I can't believe this, stalking is wrong, but then he quickly corrects himself and explains, no, I was just worried about a woman walking around alone at this dawn, so my eyes just happened to linger on her. Jokor then realizes something even more strange about his ability. But it seems that when I lock my eyes onto a moving object, the frame that appeared in reality moves along with it, making it look like I was completely stalking her. She must have been startled. I hope my apology comes across properly. He thinks about how terrifying the situation must have looked from the hunter's perspective. If a picture frame chases someone down and abruptly hands them a gem, that's actually terrifying. After sitting quietly for a while and thinking about everything that had just happened, Jokor finally realizes that giving the hunter a gem was never what he had intended to do. He thinks to himself, giving a gem was by no means the outcome I intended. The strange incident leaves him deeply confused about his own actions, and another unsettling thought crosses his mind. He wonders, could I actually be turning into another personality that I'm not even aware of? With that thought lingering in his mind, Jokor remains inside the portrait, still trying to figure out exactly what is happening to him and why his actions are beginning to produce results he never intended. Looking back on it now, when interacting with people while stuck as a portrait, I think I often displayed behavior that could be considered absurd. It feels different from synchronizing with Giovanni. If it were really that different, I would have noticed it much sooner. As Jokor thinks about this, he steps out of his hut, and a window suddenly appears in front of him, informing him of his quest completion reward. Craft a frame and check safety levels. The reward is a seal. Looking at it, Jokor thinks to himself, did I actually complete something like that? He then looks at the seal, and realizes that he knows how to use it, but there is one small problem. A seal. I know how to use this, but I don't have wax, and I don't have anyone to send a letter to either. His eyes begin to fill with tears, and he starts wondering, is the system being thoughtful by telling a friendless guy like me to make new connections? With that thought in mind, he glances toward Honey, and then another idea suddenly comes to him. Soon we see a letter, and Jokor has used a precious stone as wax to seal it. The sight of this completely catches Sungun off guard. Sungun carefully examines the place, clearly unable to understand what has happened. He thinks to himself, there are no signs of a break-in, unless someone is an S-class hunter. The security here is so thorough that no ordinary method could break through. Then where on earth did that come from? In front of him is an envelope unlike anything he has ever seen before, an envelope of pitch black color that seems to look infinitely deep, sealed with wax that has the texture of melted shimmering gems. Sungun stares at it in disbelief, wondering how something like this could possibly have appeared there. Could it really have been sent by Jokor? After carefully examining the strange letter, he eventually opens it, and the scene moves to the following day. Sungun approaches Jokor and immediately asks him, is this letter really from you? Jokor calmly looks at him and answers, yes, that is correct. I wrote my name on the letter. Did you not check it? Sungun hears his answer and hesitates for a moment before explaining, about that. I'm sorry, but it was written in a language I don't know, so I couldn't read it. Jokor is completely stunned when he hears this. He looks at Sungun in disbelief, and after thinking about it for a moment, he finally says, but from what I remember, I sent you a letter written in Korean. Sungun looks at Jokor in surprise and asks, really? Jokor calmly responds, yes. I believe an issue must have occurred during the process of delivering the letter. Hearing this, Sungun begins thinking to himself, is this also a matter of resolution? Jokor then directly apologizes to him saying, I apologize for startling you. Sunggun quickly reassures him, replying, "It's completely fine, but what did you write in the letter?" Jokor then explains what the letter contained, saying, "It was nothing special, just a light expression of gratitude and greetings." However, after hearing this, Sunggun becomes even more thoughtful. According to the rules of the portrait, a one-to-one exchange is required in order to bring an item out from inside the painting. However, an item stamped with that seal seems to be delivered directly to the other person, without being bound by that rule. Sunggun looks at Jokor and simply says, "Oh really?" But inside his mind, he continues analyzing the situation. According to the rules of the portrait, the way he speaks, it's as if he didn't make those rules himself. Does that mean it wasn't a rule he wanted, at the very least? Even if he was the one who said it and forgot about it, to try and ignore a rule imposed on him so casually like that, if that one-to-one exchange rule was given to the frame to protect Earthlings, I need to be careful. Sunggun then admits once again, "I was caught off guard. An unfamiliar letter was suddenly placed inside my house." Jokor immediately apologizes again, and explains himself saying, "I apologize, it was just that I was thinking of making a new friend. Before forming a new connection, I tried sending a letter to Mr. Yusungwon first." Sunggun pauses when he hears the words "new friend." Joker confirms it, saying, "Yes. However, a letter can only be delivered if the recipient is precise. Since I have confirmed that even the language is not properly conveyed, I will give a bit more thought to how I can make a new friend." Hearing this, Sunggun quietly thinks to himself, it seems he's quite intent on making a new friend. "What do you think would happen if I were to paint a landscape?" Joker pauses for a moment before asking, "By any chance do you also enjoy painting landscapes?" Joker then answers honestly, "Yes, I painted one yesterday as well. In the case of worlds that I have drawn, I can move between them without much difficulty." Sunggun immediately becomes more serious after hearing this. Inside his mind he thinks, worlds that he drew? Is he saying right now that he can draw dimensions and travel through them on his own? That's a massive scale. Realizing the possible implications of Joker's words, Sunggun carefully asks him, "Does that mean you can travel into dungeons as well?" But the moment he asks the question, another thought crosses his mind. How far did guild leader Bisaimel anticipate? No. How far did he see? I need to raise Joker's threat assessment even higher. Joker then responds, trying to clarify exactly what Sunggun means by dungeons. "Are you referring to dungeons that already have entrances on Earth and can be visited by Earthlings as well?" Sunggun immediately confirms, "Right, dungeons that hunters like me can visit." After a brief pause, Joker finally gives his answer, saying, "I have not attempted that part yet." However, after hearing Joker's words, Sunggun becomes interested and thinks to himself, he's showing interest. Should I consider that a relief? I can suggest moving to a place within a controllable range. Then, how about a dungeon as a place to look for a new friend? With that thought, he opens his box, and the scene suddenly cuts away. Through the voiceover we are told that this place is somewhere where human casualties can be minimized as much as possible. At the same time, someone can be heard shouting in frustration, "Fuck, this is so damn infuriating." Another person then says, "We're short one return stone, sorry about this." Immediately afterward, everyone leaves the area, abandoning the girl behind. Watching them disappear, the girl thinks to herself, no matter how harsh the world is, leaving someone behind in a dungeon without even knowing the exit? She becomes furious and shouts, "I'm a porter, not a piece of fucking luggage. If I wasn't so broke, I wouldn't have taken a job with guys hunting something like an anti-cat." In Ipanegen, after saying this, she sits down in the dungeon and begins thinking about how badly everything has gone. If rare monsters like that were so easy to find and sell, A-class hunters would have already tracked them down and sold them off. Fuck, just when I thought I finally got lucky with a job. An ant nest dungeon where the only strategy guide says find the exit. The inhabiting monsters suck out your vitality, so if you lose focus, your lifespan will be cut in half and you'll die. I have to move somehow, and get out. She desperately tries to figure out what she can do, but the situation seems completely hopeless. As tears well up in her eyes, she quietly asks herself, why is my life like this after all? Just then, something begins moving toward her from nearby. She notices it approaching and slowly looks in its direction. To her surprise, it is a small cat-like creature. The moment she sees it, her eyes widen in shock, and she suddenly shouts, "Anti-cat!" The female hunter happily says, "To think I'd live to see that." At the same time, she angrily thinks to herself, "Those bastards, leaving me behind. What do they expect me to do? While I'm still breathing, I hope you all go screw yourselves." After that, we see the cat sitting quietly in one place for a while. A little later, the cat finally gets up and starts moving forward, while the female hunter continues following it from behind. As she follows the cat, she thinks to herself, "It's not like I had any intention of catching that thing anyway. A monster that burns down everything around it when it gets angry? How in the world could I ever catch that? Raising a monster like that is illegal in the first place, so those guys secretly buying and selling it must be out of their minds." When she sees the cat walking farther away, she becomes frustrated and says, "So please don't run away." The cat then turns its head and looks back at her. Seeing this, the hunter continues following it while thinking to herself, Intelligence says the anti-cat moves toward the dungeon exit. She keeps following the cat without stopping, and after walking for some time, she suddenly begins to feel that something is strange. She thinks to herself, wait a minute, wasn't that monster supposed to hate humans? But strangely enough, it looks as though it's luring me in. Is it just my imagination? Just then, a mysterious figure suddenly appears right in front of her. An enormous amount of powerful energy is being released from his body, making his presence extremely intimidating. The figure calmly reaches out and places his hand on the girl's head before simply saying, hello. The moment she hears his voice, the female hunter immediately screams loudly in terror, completely frightened by his sudden appearance. After that, the scene shifts back to a point sometime earlier. We see Sunggun standing in front of the portrait, explaining the reason he chose this particular dungeon. He calmly says, the dungeons here aren't the kind of terrifying places that would put you in real danger. The rewards are low and public recognition is poor, so hunters rarely visit them. I picked this place thinking it might be suitable, so I'm glad it worked out. Wandering around a place like this, isn't there a chance you might make a new friend? With that, he thinks to himself, please, I just hope he doesn't take this suggestion the wrong way. At the same time, inside the portrait, Joker says, thank you. This is a gift as a token of my gratitude. Sunggun looks at the item and says, jerky? Joker immediately explains, yes, it has been dried very well. Seeing it, Sunggun thinks to himself, he said he enjoyed cooking, so he makes things like this too. He then looks at Joker and says, thanks, you really didn't need to give me this much though. Joker responds, not at all, Mr. You Sunggun, it would be better if you gained more weight than you have now. Sunggun looks at him in confusion and says, what? No, I'm fairly sturdy for my size. Joker looks at him and firmly says, you are thin, you must eat more. Hearing that, Sunggun thinks to himself, is this guy my grandmother or something? The scene then immediately shifts inside the portrait, where we see Joker preparing to leave. He says, putting aside fattening up Yu Sunggun for now, shall we head straight to the dungeon he recommended? Honey? As soon as he says this, the painting suddenly moves, and Joker instantly arrives at the same dungeon where the female hunter is currently present. Looking around the area, he says, indeed, he said people were scarce here, but even after walking for a while, I haven't seen a single person. Joker looks around in every direction after arriving at the dungeon. On one side, Honey is standing nearby, while on the other side, some strange glowing particles are floating in the air. After observing everything around him, Joker says, as if it knows I'm completely harmless, even something that looks like a monster greeted me as it passed by. He then continues, it looks just like the animals inside my paintings. Just then the cat also approaches him and starts rubbing itself around his legs. Joker gently pets the cat and says, has the time finally come for me to be chosen by a cat? He then looks at it and asks, aren't you cute? What's your name? The moment he asks, a status window suddenly appears in front of him, revealing all the information about the cat. It reads, anti-cat, a jewel-encrusted cat-type monster. It harbors an extreme hatred for Earth's creatures, so humans on Earth named it anti-cat. Elixir crafting, see more. Joker continues gently touching the cat while thinking about what he has just learned. He says, it hates Earth's creatures, then what about me? Do I not count as a creature of Earth? He then continues speaking to the cat, saying, little one, although I'm currently living inside a portrait almost by force because my identity and real estate were liquidated, despite how I look, I am a proud citizen of South Korea who grew up absorbing the clear aura of the Gangwon-do Mountains. Do I have catnip on my hands or something? I wanted to gain a friend, but all I got was a master. The cat then says something in its own language, and after hearing it, Joker continues, still, I wish there was at least one person I could talk to. Right after saying this, the cat suddenly starts leading him toward another location. Joker follows behind as the cat runs ahead, and he asks in surprise, oh, where are you going all of a sudden? Is someone over there? Looking at everything happening around him, Joker thinks to himself, could this be a friendship brought together by an animal? A beautiful encounter just like a fairy tale. The scene then returns to the exact moment when he came across the female hunter, who is now completely shocked and terrified after seeing him standing so close to her. Seeing how frightened she looks, Joker thinks to himself, this is a little hurtful. The female hunter stares at him in disbelief and thinks, what is this, a person? Even though they were this close, I didn't feel a single presence? Looking closely, isn't that the nice student from yesterday? Joker looks at her and thinks to himself, he looks to be about high school age. Did I startle such a young student? This time for sure, I have to make him feel at ease. Even though Joker is thinking all of this with good intentions, his terrifying presence is making the female hunter even more nervous and frightened. Joker then remembers something his grandmother always told him and thinks, my grandmother always said that to break the tension when meeting someone for the first time, you should start by exchanging names. With that in mind, Joker finally speaks in a deep and terrifying voice. Hello. My name is Seo Joker. What is your name? Despite the fact that his expression makes it look like he is not trying to scare anyone at all, his overwhelming presence has the exact opposite effect. The female hunter becomes even more terrified and thinks to herself, I never heard anything about a humanoid monster appearing in this dungeon. Joker continues standing there with the same intimidating presence and notices how nervous she is. He then calmly says, you seem nervous. Are you afraid of me? I promise I won't harm you in any way. I am curious about your name. The frightened female hunter's entire body is trembling as she desperately thinks to herself, what should I do? What am I supposed to do? If I state my name here, will I spout blood and die? Or will I be killed if I don't answer? Instead, no. Am I even in a position to choose something like that? Whether I do as ordered or not, it's a matter of life or death. Right now, still trembling with fear, she struggles to speak and finally manages to say, Cha-Cha-Ara. It's Cha-Ara. Joker responds in the same terrifying tone. Nice to meet you, Miss Cha-Ara. Would you like to talk with me? The moment she hears this, the female hunter begins to tear up and thinks to herself, this is that thing. It's definitely that thing. A monster that kills you if you answer its question wrong. I'm really not confident with stuff like this. She immediately clasps her hands together in front of him and desperately pleads, please, save me, I beg you. Even after saying that, she remains extremely nervous because of his terrifying presence. Suddenly, she starts feeling another kind of discomfort and thinks to herself, my damn stomach, showing no sense of timing at a moment like this. Then, speaking out loud, she apologizes. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's because I haven't been able to eat for the past 3 days. Joker's expression changes as he asks in a heavy voice, 3 days? The female hunter quickly shakes her head and explains, yes. Well, that's why I came here to work as a porter. A porter. But I was abandoned. And starving had nothing to do with that. As Joker listens to everything she says, his expression slowly changes. His face clearly shows that he has become angry after hearing about what happened to her. Seeing his expression, the female hunter becomes even more frightened and thinks to herself, did I say something wrong? Am I truly fucked? Just then, Joker does something that suddenly generates an enormous amount of powerful light. His expression becomes serious as he says, unforgivable. Miss Kara, we are acquaintances, aren't we? A student doing manual labor without even being able to eat. Will you accept my invitation?